SAC Reincarnation, The Cycle of Necessity. Reincarnation, The Cycle of Necessity by Manly P Hall. The Philosophical Research Society Incorporated, Los Angeles, California. ISBN No. 0-89314-519 XLC 40-3326. Copyright 1939, 1967 by the Philosophical Research Society, INE, all rights reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced in any form without permission from the publisher. 7th printing, 1978. Library of Congress Cataloging in Publication Data Hall, Manly Palmer, 1901. Reincarnation, The Cycle of Necessity, by Manly P Hall. Ist ed. Los Angeles, California. The Philosopher's Press, 1939, 3 p. 1, 9-198 p2 pl, 1 fold, 24 cm. Bibliography, p. 191-198, 1 Reincarnation. BL 515.H3 129.4 43326. Library of Congress FOS 6C14 in print, published by the Philosophical Research Society Incorporated. 3910, Los Feliz Boulevard, Los Angeles, California, 90027. Printed in the USA. Aarhus Universität de Theologische Institute. This book is dedicated to Carolyn A. Lloyd with the sincere regards of the author. By way of introduction, the purpose of this present writing is to encourage the study of the doctrine of reincarnation as the most reasonable solution to the mystery of life. There is already considerable literature on the subject, and other books will be written in the future. But until now the circulation of these works has been limited, so that the general public is as yet uninformed on this most important of all philosophical teachings. To me, the laws of reincarnation and karma are the only solutions to the eternal problem of human unfitness. In the words of a celebrated Orientalist, it is only the knoll edge of the constant rebirths of one and the same individual throughout the life cycle, that can explain to us the mysterious problem of good and evil, and reconcile man to the terrible and apparent injustice of life. Nothing but such certainty can quiet our revolted sense of justice. For, when one unacquainted with the noble doctrine looks around him, and observes the inequalities of birth and fortune, of intellect and capacities, when one sees honor-paid fools and profligates, on whom fortune has heaped her favors by mere privilege of birth, while their nearest neighbor with all his intellect and noble virtues far more deserving in every way perishing of want and for lack of sympathy, when one sees 910 reincarnation, thr psyched or necsiry all this and has to turn away, helpless to relieve the undeserved suffering, one's ears ringing and heart aching with the cries of pain around him, that blessed knowledge of karma alone prevents him from cursing life and men, as well as their supposed creator. Reincarnation is nothing more nor less than the law of evolution applied to the unfolding consciousness of the individual. All growth and development bear witness to the improvement of that invisible divine force which is the cause of all physical growth and development. Everything in the universe is growing up through the experiences of existence. Why should man be left unaware of his participation in this eternal growth? Why should he be bound round with dogmas of fear and doubt, man-made conceits in the midst of a God-made world? As may be expected of any widely diffused belief, reincarnation has been variously stated according to the spiritual and rational powers of its interpreters. It is obvious that the Eskimo concept should be less philosophical and detailed than that of a great East Indian scholar. In substance both agree, but each interprets this law according to his own world of experience. It is a law of the Eskimo, who lives a precarious existence, that the old and the feeble must be left behind. It is customary, therefore, for one of advancing years to look about him for an appropriate family into which to be reborn. Selecting a newly married couple, he goes to them and asks if they will permit him to be their first child. If he is a good and honorable person, they probably will give their consent. The H.P. Blavatsky. By way or introduction, aging man will then depart from the camp, and going some distance will commit suicide, believing that his soul will come into the new family he has selected. To our modern and practical mind, the Druids of ancient Britain and Gaul gave even greater testimony of their belief. In the British Museum are receipts and other Druidic legal remains proving that it was not uncommon for these men to borrow money on their promise to repay in a future existence. Dr. L. E. Plongian found evidence of a belief in reincarnation among the Maya and Quiche Indians of Central America. The belief is imputed also to the Incas and other peoples of the Andes in South America. New research makes it possible for me to include in this edition a survey of the belief in reincarnation among the American Indians. This is the first time that the Amerindian concepts have been included in any book dealing with rebirth. We hope that at some future date it will be possible to examine the cults of Central Africa, among which, also, there are vestiges of the doctrine. In our treatment of the subject we have departed somewhat from the precedent laid down by previous writers. In the first place we have not included literary and poetical references to reincarnation. This is because we have no assurance that a poetical or fictional reference actually represents the sober opinion of the author. Nor have we included a vast amount of borderline material which is doubtful in its implication. Thirdly, we have omitted those reminiscences of people who traveling to different localities suddenly feel that they have been there before. And lastly, we have restricted our quotations to authorities whose opinion to reincarnation, the cycle or necrosis ions hold weight as arising from scholarship and achievement in various fields of thought. There is an abundance of quotable material which may be equally authentic, but coming from unknown sources carries little weight against the almost impervious materialism of our times. By no means have we exhausted the potential sources of information. To publish all the statements of scholars and thinkers on this subject would take thousands of pages. Therefore we have collected only such as are indicative of the general trend. It is obvious that no one can be compelled to accept a belief because that belief is enlightened. Man accepts only when he himself is enlightened. The doctrine of reincarnation carries with it an almost metaphysical power of conviction. When a normal, healthy mind is given an adequate understanding of the meaning of this law, there is an instantaneous psychic sympathy. It is as though the mind suddenly remembers something it has known over vast periods of time. In the words of Plato, learning is remembering. The inward part of man, recognizing truth, may not deny or ignore it, but in the terms of Plotinus, flows joyously toward reality and embraces it. I have discussed reincarnation with many persons, and frequently have observed an unexplainable flash of acceptance. To these the discovery of this law is the end of seeking and the beginning of becoming. Many Parmarhari table of contents pace by way or introduction y definition of terms 15 reincarnation in ancient India 21 Bupua Tuesday Licht or Asia 27 previous lives of Buddha 3 Tuesday reborn lamas of Tibet wn Almatem psychosis and Greek philosophy, CSS and East _. 49 Tuesday Law or Rebirth in China and Japan NNNOT Reincarnation in Islam OAOL Reincarnation among the American Indians 69 Reincarnation and the Old Testament, --77 Reincarnation and Thai New Testament, _. 83 Irsi Curry's Tien Fathers on Reincarnation, 89 Reperton in Mopar Orang Christendom, 97 Mopern Believers in Reincarnation, SSS and so are 103 Tuesday Cycle of Necessity. 109 Reincarnation in the Animal World, 117 Reincarnation in the Plant World, -121 Reincarnation in the Mineral World, -125 Regborn Nations and Races, _. 129 Tuesday Divine Incarnations 133 Sout Mates. GSE. Saint Memory of Past Lives. 141 Shanti Devi Sid Tuesday Our Death State. OSS The Laws Govern Reincarnation 163 Suicide 169 Fate vs Free Will. Sad The Secret of Genius, _179 Force of ENS of Sin vs Karma, _Eames Buddhisiptines of Liberation, _189 Ninva ANA _00 197 Bibliography 0208 Postscript CCC SOAS Ball Index SNINVAAC 218 Definition of terms Words are the vehicles of ideas, and unless they are understood properly, misunderstanding is inevitable. The English language is immature for the reason that Western civilization itself has not yet achieved maturity. The language has a rich commercial and industrial vocabulary, but is woefully lacking in exact philosophical terms. Possibly the most perfect of philosophical languages is Sanskrit. It is the Sanskrit word samsara that has been translated as reincarnation. Literally, the word reincarnation means to incarnate again, to be re-embodied, or more accurately, to be re-unfleshed, to return after death to the physical world in another physical body. To the Oriental, the word samsara implies this and more. It is a word symbol for a complete idea, the progressive re-embodiments of the ego, self, or sattva, depending on the philosophic system. The law of reincarnation as revealed by Buddha teaches that all living things, animate and inanimate, must pass through innumerable re-embodiments until all imperfections have been removed by experience. The word rebirth as used in Western schools of metaphysics is identical in technical meaning with reincarnation, but lacks a little of the color and inferences of the latter term. The law of rebirth is the law of reincarnation, and for practical purposes the two terms may be regarded as synonymous. 116 Reincarnation, the cycle or necessity. The Greek word metempsychos is defined as the passing of the soul at death into another body, whether of a brute or a person. For our purposes we wish somewhat to refine this definition. Platonists explicitly state that, in reincarnating, the spiritual entity of an exceedingly depraved person might overshadow an animal, but never actually enters into an animal body. In the Platonic Philosopher's Creed, Thomas Taylor, the most distinguished of modern Platonists, says, "I also believe that the human soul on its departure from the present life, will, if not properly purified, pass into other terrene bodies, and that if it passes into a human body, it becomes the soul of that body, but if into the body of a brute, it does not become the soul of the brute, but is externally connected with the brutal soul in the same manner as presiding daemons are connected in their beneficent operation with mankind, for the rational part never becomes the soul of the irrational nature." In this present writing we shall follow the opinion of the most learned of the Greeks and regard metempsychosis as synonymous with reincarnation, as a progressive and not a retrogressive process, reserving the term transmigration to define the less evolved opinions of inferior peoples. The term transmigration also means successive embodiments. We shall use it in the restricted sense of rebirth in lower or animal bodies, which belief is held by the less informed in many Asiatic countries. For example, it is a prevalent belief among many Hindus in Benares that a person dying on the opposite side of the river from where the temples and ghats stand shall be reborn in the form of a donkey. In view of this, it is rather remarkable that the Raja's palace should stand on the wrong side of the river. Definition of term 17 Palingenesis is occasionally used as a synonym for reincarnation. More exactly, however, the word signifies revivification, regeneration, resurrection, of renewal. In alchemy, palingenesis is the restoration of bodies from their ashes. The experiments are performed in sealed retorts. Both Paracelsus and the Jesuit Father Athanasius Kircher performed this experiment. The term therefore should only imply the resurrection or renewal of an old form or body so that it may be re-embodied by the entity. Pre-existence is the belief in the existence of the spirit prior to its descent into birth. This doctrine has been defended by a wide variety of eminent persons and is responsible for a number of misstatements in books dealing with the subject of reincarnation. Although pre-existence may involve a belief in reincarnation, this is not by any means an infallible rule. A simple example is the biblical statement, "Before Abraham was, am." This statement, while it may indicate the belief in pre-existence, does not necessarily imply reincarnation. Certain sects believe that we may live again, or have lived before, but not on the physical earth. It has even been suggested that souls pass from planet to planet. Such beliefs should not be confused with the doctrine of reincarnation. Immortality simply means the deathlessness of the spirit. Immortality is agreed upon by the greater part of the human race, but as the term does not imply any necessity for physical rebirth, the belief in immortality is not synonymous with the belief in reincarnation. The divine part of man is commonly called the spirit, the permanent being, that which is the cause of body and operates through body, but is capable of an existence independent of body. In some systems this spiritual permanence 18 reincarnation, the psyche or necessary is called the self as distinguished from its body and appetites which are termed the not self. In Buddhist philosophy the self is termed the sattva, and it is the sattva which is periodically re-embodied in the cycle of necessity. In more advanced philosophies the self, sattva, or spirit, is regarded as impersonal. It emanates personalities into the phenomenal world, but never for an instant should be confused with these personalities. The personality is seldom reborn. Thus Plato or Napoleon will never live again, but the spirit that emanated Plato or Napoleon will emanate new personalities and will continue to evolve through these emanations. The term ego is occasionally used to distinguish the sattva of a human being from the sattva of inferior or superior creations. Ego means I or selfness, and supposedly is applied only to creatures capable of the conscious knowledge of I. The sattva or entity of the subhuman kingdom is properly termed a monad, which to the reincarnationist means the collective entity of a species or type, an unindividualized self. Personality is the term applied to the complex of mind, emotion, sense, and form. Personalities are those objective parts of man's composite nature which are discernible or sensible to others, and come to be regarded as realities by the uninformed. To most people reincarnation signifies the re-embodiment of their personalities. This is the key to the confusion in Isis Unveiled, wherein Madame Blavatsky insists that personalities are not reborn except under unusual conditions. Personality is the most impermanent part of man, and is subject to modification and change during life, and utter dissolution at death. Definition of terms 19 in the Buddhistic philosophy, a bodhisattva or enlightened self is one in whom the imperfections of the material existence have ceased or died out. Through realization and meditation the bodhisattva has reached the point of liberation. He may choose to go forward and enter nirvana, which is the end of personalized existence, or he may choose to remain for a time as a teacher and guide for others less perfect than himself. The bodhisattva therefore must make what is termed the great choice, the choice of existence or non-existence. A Buddha is a perfected soul or sattva in which all karma is finished, that is, the three fires of personal existence, thought, emotion, and action have burned out. A bodhisattva may remain for some time as a teacher, and then, having completed his responsibility, may choose to become a Buddha. Buddhahood is the last life on this earth, therefore a Buddha does not die. He passes into nirvana. His causal nature is disseminated through time and space, and he ceases forever to exist as a being. The cycle of necessity is the will of birth and death. It is the cycle of consecutive re-embodiment covering that time from the beginning of individualized existence to the final absorption in nirvana, or the completion of material existence. Buddha is frequently represented in the posture of turning a wheel with 8 spokes. This is the wheel of existences to which men cling because of their ignorance, and from which they are released only through illumination. Memory of past lives. In both the Eastern and Western schools the memory of past lives is awakened only after initiation into the mysteries. This memory is preserved in the permanent self and may be contacted when the lower personality is lifted up by discipline into communion or par 20 reincarnation, the cycle or neccs reticipation with the self. For the uninitiated there is no advantage in remembering past personalities. Karma means compensation, and is the application of the law of cause and effect to the moral lives of personalized creatures. The law of karma motivates rebirth. Reincarnation is made necessary by the accumulation of good and evil actions brought forward from previous existences. Rebirth must continue as long as karma remains. Christ is made to say, "As ye sow, so shall ye reap." This is a statement of the law of compensation. But a theological system teaching the forgiveness of sin can never adhere very closely to the law of compensation. Buddha's statement of the same law permits no intercession or escape. Effect follows cause as the wheel of the cart follows the foot of the oxen. Rebirth takes the place of faith and atonement, giving to each incarnating entity fresh lives in which to master and transmute personal imperfections. As karma is compensation, so dharma is conduct, the ascensions from which karmic consequences are derived. A man's dharma is the life which he has earned in the past plus his own philosophical conduct toward his own imperfections. Thus dharma bestows the element of progress so that there is not only punishment, but growth during each incarnation. The ultimate dharma is to voluntarily embrace the law, become an arhat, and seek nirvana. Reincarnation. In ancient India, it is impossible to state with certainty at what time the doctrine of reincarnation first came to be believed in India. The Vedas, the most ancient of the Hindu sacred books, contain no definite statement of rebirth. The Vedic concept of the after-death state corresponds closely with that of the early Greeks. The soul departs from the body and wanders as a ghost in the underworld. Homer, describing the soul of Achilles, gives no promise of a future life, but leaves the hero's shade wandering aimlessly in the fields of the dead. According to S.E. Gopalacharlu in his article The Indian Doctrine of Reincarnation, there are inferences of a continuity of lives in the Rig Veda. He gives the 30 sec andrik of the first section as follows: He who produced him does not know him. From him who sees him, he is concealed. He is hidden within the womb of his mother. Taking many births he has entered upon misery. Asterisk at AP pairs, however, that the first part of the last sentence, taking many births, reads in the original Bahupraja and that the interpretation is alternative and therefore inconclusive. We asterisk the Theosophist, May, 1892, p. 480. Plus literal meaning, having many progeny. 2I22 Reincarnation, the cycle of necessity particularly mention this because of the frequent reference to this important verse. Metempsychosis is stated expressly, however, in the Atharva Veda, the Institutes of Manu, the Vishnu Purana, and in the Upanishads. An example typifies the mood of these scriptures and commentaries. In man there are arteries, thin as a hair split 1,000 times, filled with fluid, blue, red, green, yellow, etc. The tenuous involucrum asterisk, the base or ethereal frame of the astral body, is lodged in them and the ideal residue of the experiences of the former embodiments adhere to the said tenuous involucrum and accompany it in its passage from body to body. Plus to the East Indian mind the Institutes of Manu is a work of special sanctity as a revelation of law and conduct. In the 12th section of this work appears the statement, the various transmigrations of men through the highest, middle, and lowest stages, are produced by their actions. In this case we may safely say that the English translator should have used the word reincarnation instead of transmigration. Here is an example of Western misinterpretation of Eastern scriptures, but we can expect no better when we realize what has occurred to our own sacred books. The Upanishads were compiled in the century immediately preceding the birth of Buddha. Their inspiration is the Veda, and they comprise a vast literature dealing with the most recondite phases of metaphysics. They abound in references to the doctrine of rebirth. For example, in the Svetasvatara Upanishad is the statement, according to his deeds the embodied one successively assumes forms in various involucrum, a wrapper, an envelope or sheath. Plus Lucifer, Volume 4. p. 89. Reincarnation in Ancient India 23 editions. In the Mundaka Upanishad reincarnation is expressed in the words, having had enjoyment on the top of the heaven won by good works, they re-enter this world. The Katha Upanishad is particularly poetic. The human race is like the grain that ripens, it falls, and is born again. The Puranas are poetical works belonging to the class of sacred books, and like the Upanishads are held in the highest esteem. References to rebirth appear also in the Puranic literature. The Bhagavat Purana contains the following reference, action brings rebirth, yet action can destroy itself when devoted toward the Supreme Being. Several learned pundits have written to defend themselves against Western misconceptions of their belief in transmigration. They insist that the informed Hindu does not believe that he will be reborn in any creature less than human. This, however, cannot prevent local superstitions which abound in every country from distorted religious teachings. The Hindu believes in a progressive cycle of births. In his conception, karma or compensation plays a most important part. He views life as a period of compensation and retribution. Christian missionaries have cried out against this so horrible doctrine. But to the Oriental mind, the Occidental belief in damnation is infinitely more horrible. The most famous of all Hindu scriptures is that part of the Mahabharata called the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord's Song. The Gita is the Brahman's book of psalms, his constant inspiration, his rule of conduct. From a literary standpoint, the book equals any of the sacred books of the world, and surpasses many in dignity and beauty. The Gita truly summarizes the Hindu's concept of rebirth. The section dealing with the subject is as follows: 24 Reincarnation, the cycle or necessity as a man, casting off worn-out garments, taketh new ones, so the dweller in the body, casting off worn-out bodies, entereth into others that are new. For sure is the death of him that is born, and sure the birth of him that is dead, therefore over the inevitable thou shouldst not grieve. There can be no reasonable doubt that reincarnation was a major tenet of Brahmanism centuries before the rise of Buddhist culture. Tradition has it that the teaching originally belonged to the caste of the warriors, among whom it was guarded as an esoteric secret. It was only after many centuries that it came into the possession of the other Brahmanical sects. It may be interesting in passing to remember that Buddha himself belonged to the caste of the warriors. Therefore, the teaching must have been strongly emphasized in his early training. The end for which the Brahmans strove was emancipation from the cycle of return. In the course of time, these original beliefs became theologized. Brahmanism degenerated from a natural aristocracy to a more or less despotic caste system. The Brahmin was no longer a Brahmin because of the superiority of his actions, but rather by the accident of his birth. Wherever there has been a people to exploit, sacerdotalism has never been far away. A form of vicarious atonement crept into the primitive statement, destroying its fundamental integrity. Life became a succession of offerings and purification. The Eastern mind sought for its shortcut to the Brahman world. Even today some Indian sects, including the Tantrics, are fully convinced that in one life they can conquer the ages in themselves and pass triumphantly to Brahmaloka. Reincarnation in ancient India. 25 Arthur Avalon in The Serpent Power acknowledges the tantric acceptance of rebirth. There is no such thing as the resurrection of the same body. It returns to dust, and the jiva when it reincarnates does so in a new body which is nevertheless, like the last, suited to give effect to its karma. It was against the intolerances of the Brahmin castes that Gautama Buddha raised his voice. He made public one of the most priceless secrets of the Brahmans, the law of reincarnation. For the hundreds of millions who have followed this law, he destroyed forever the intrinsic superiority of one man over another. He stated that the only form of spiritual democracy that can exist in space is the privilege of each individual to perfect himself. Reincarnation finds its place in the teachings of the Vedantic school. Swami Abhedananda writes, Vedanta teaches that it is neither the will of God nor the fault of the parents that has formed the characters of those children, but each child is responsible for its own tendencies, capacities, powers, and character. The doctrine of reincarnation alone can explain most satisfactorily and rationally many instances of uncommon powers and genius displayed in childhood. The attitude of the Yoga sect is summarized by Haridas Bhattacharya, as beings have been coming and going during the whole period of their eternal life, they must have assumed many shapes in course of transmigration, and a deposit of impressions of those different lives is left in the chitta as vasanas. It is common to both the Yoga and Vedantic schools to regard their teachings as a means of releasing the soul from registered Vedanta philosophy. 3 Lectures, p. 22. Cultural Heritage of India, Volume 1:335. 26 Reincarnation, the cycle or necessity, the net of the law. They regard spiritual achievement as a means of release from the law of rebirth. In the latter half of the 19th century, the Theosophical Society, with its international headquarters at Udyar near Madras, created a profound stir in the Oriental mind. The group restated the belief in reincarnation, disseminating it throughout Asia, Europe, and America. With more than 200 branches in India alone, the society drew to itself some of the ablest priests, monks, and pundits, with the result that extensive research was made into the old scriptures for evidences and traces of the teaching of reincarnation. In and around Bombay live the Parsis, the last remnants of the Zoroastrians, followers of the fire cult of Persia. The most ancient sacred book of the Parsis is the Zendavesta, written by the last Zoroaster sometime before 600 BC. While the Zendavesta contains no direct statement as evidence of belief in rebirth, much of the religious literature of the Parsis, including works considered of great authority, refers to this subject. The Desatir, a collection of sacred writings of ancient Persian prophets, contains the following verse: "And everyone who wisheth to return to the lower world, and is a doer of good, shall, according to his knowledge and conversation and actions, receive something, either as a king or prime minister, or high office, or wealth." Buddha, the light of Asia. The rise of Buddhism in the 6th century BC resulted in a wide dissemination of the doctrines of reincarnation and karma, the principal tenets of the faith. Gautama Siddhartha, Prince of Kapilavastu, the most illustrious of the Sakya family, stands out as one of the greatest men in the history of the world. Leaving wealth and honors behind him, the young Prince Siddhartha renounced the world for the ascetic life. Years later, after wanderings and privations, he received the illumination at Buddha Gaya. Achieving Buddhahood, he devoted his life to teaching the two great laws, reincarnation and karma. Having preached and taught upon the earth for more than 80 years, and having lived to see his doctrines disseminated throughout Asia, the great sage finally entered nirvana, leaving behind a faith that was to endure as a foundation of inspiration for ages then unborn. Buddha left no writings of his own, but soon after his transition his followers and disciples gathered in council and recorded from memory the words that he had spoken. Later, under the Emperor Asoka, the Constantine of Buddhism, there were great synods of monks. As a result of these convocations encouraged by royal patronage, Buddhism became a religion. Edicts were drawn up, laws were established for the clergy, and the simple agnosticism of Gautama was slowly transformed into an elaborate polytheism. In Tibet Bud 2728 Reincarnation, the cycle or necessitydism achieved its greatest complexity, accumulating a pantheon of more than 80,000 gods and demons. Buddha cannot be held responsible, however, for the vicissitudes of his faith. He stated great and simple truths. It remained for those who loved him but could never understand his true teachings to theologize the original tenets. Fortunately, however, the teachings of the Master regarding reincarnation and karma have survived, and while adorned with the trumpery of numerous enthusiasts, the essential truths remain. To Buddha, reincarnation was the solution to the apparent inequalities of life. Without the law of rebirth, existence was purposeless, meaningless, and absurd. Karma, likewise, explained the purpose of rebirth. We are born to live out the good and evil of previous lives. Reincarnation makes possible the absolute fulfillment of the law of cause and effect. There is no escaping the result of action. Man must be ready to accept the responsibility for what he does and must so conduct himself at all times that retribution is outwitted by his own virtue. There is immense dignity in the simple statement of cause and effect. There is strength and assurance in Buddha's interpretation of this law. He derived his philosophy from the older writings of Hindu sages. But it remained for him to drive home the truths. At the Anavatapta tank, Buddha gathered with his disciples, where one of them asked him to explain his own karma as carried forward from other lives. It amazed the disciples that their master, perfect in wisdom, should still suffer from imperfections of the flesh. While walking that day, a cactus thorn had entered his foot, and from a nearby village he had Bupua, the Lakut of Asia 29, returned with his alms bowl empty. Likewise, some strangers had spoken unkindly of him. To the disciples it seemed impossible that one so perfect, so complete in wisdom, should still suffer as do ordinary mortals. The Venerable One answered them smilingly, "Listen, I will explain to you the wonderful and indissoluble sequences of karma. They follow you when you advance, even when you pause, they pause. The bonds of karma, like true servants, ever attend on all creatures. They dive into the forest, roam over the regions, climb the lofty mountain, attack and find their way into Indra's abode, and even enter the nether world which is inaccessible to man. Karma is like the stream of time. Never can its course be stopped in its constant pursuit of man. Long is the vine of karma, new, and yet always covered with old fruit, a wonderful companion of all creatures, and yet immovable. However you may pull it, grasp it, part it, uproot it, twist it, rub it, or skillfully break it into atoms, it is never destroyed. That the beauteous moon bears the dark spot of blame on her disk, that the cruel black snake carries the gem which catches the netted beam, is all due to the action of karma, which in manifold form shows the variegated experiences of all creatures. From this statement and the context, it is obvious that Buddha did not interpret his high attainment as a means of evading or nullifying the mistakes of previous lives. In fact, original Buddhism offers no escape mechanism of any kind, nor does it compromise for any reason the perfect working of the law. It is inevitable that there should be differences of opinion on this subject. Even today many persons claim *50th Palava of K. Shimandra's Kalpalada. 30 Reincarnation, the cycle of necsirying to be devout Buddhists have fallen into the delusions of a vicarious atonement. It has always been my opinion that if reincarnation and karma are universal laws, as I believe them to be, they cannot have exceptions, nor can they be compromised by human beings seeking to escape from the responsibilities of personal integrity. As well order the sun to stand still, or the tides to cease their ebb and flow, as to supplicate these laws. If there be any justice in the universe, if there be anything in space worthy of the faith of man, it is immutable law, far from the bribery of offerings and sacrifices, and equally far from the mummery of prayer. To my knowledge, most people who believe in reincarnation and karma accept the possibility of these laws being placated by some bribe. Some hope to breathe themselves into an immediate nirvana. Others confuse law with the forgiveness of sin. Still others seek by the constant repetition of sacred words and names to escape their just deserts. But if the law of rebirth be in any way a law, if karma be a fact in the universe, then its immutability and its eternal constancy is the refuge of the wise man. The philosopher desires to escape nothing, he is not searching for shortcuts. He is prepared to pay his bills and is satisfied to live under the conditions he has earned. This does not mean that he will not strive after better things, but he expects no better state for himself until he has grown wiser through his own works. Buddhism divided into two general schools of thought within which flourished innumerable sects. These schools are called the Hinayana or small cart, and the Mahayana, the large cart. According to the Pundit Hariprasad Sastri, the principal goal of the Hinayana school is the extinction or bupua, the liqueur or Asia 31 absorption of self. The virtues are practiced not for the common good of mankind, but for the liberation of the prakriti oner. Therefore the sect is regarded as essentially selfish, concerned only with its own good. The Mahayana system softens the austere philosophic atheism of primitive Buddhism. It clothes simple truths in elaborate symbolism. The simplest way of stating the matter may be that the Hinayana remained a philosophy and the Mahayana became a religion. Both schools agree on the subjects of reincarnation and karma, but it is said that the Mahayana system broadened the road to nirvana. The Mahayana system moved northward into Tibet, China, and the border states of India. The Hinayana retired to Ceylon, where its scholars seek nirvana's bliss and reject the world. From the great Buddhist university at Nalanda and other centers of Buddhist learning, missionary priests inspired by the significance of the great laws of rebirth and compensation journeyed forth to carry the Buddhist doctrines to the furthermost corners of Asia. Such was Padmasambhava, the wizard of Tibet. Driving before him oxen laden with books, this intrepid man crossed the great Himalayan passes to carry the law to the cannibal tribes of Tibet. Another missionary going to a cruel and savage land was asked what he would do if the natives should desire to kill him. He replied, "It is no matter. They may destroy me, but they cannot destroy the law. So he went forth and converted the people. One by one the nations of Asia accepted the doctrines of reincarnation and karma. Burma, Indochina, and Cambodia received the law. It was carried southward to the islands of Sumatra, Java, and Bali. Korea embraced the teachings of 32 reincarnation, the cycle of Necestri the Enlightened One. And in the 6th century of the Christian era the law reached Japan, where it is now disseminated through more than 20 principal sects. In China Buddhism mingled with the teachings of Lao Tzu and Confucius. To China belongs the honor of having first printed the words attributed to Gautama Buddha. As early as the Tang dynasty the Prajnaparamita Sutra was printed from wood blocks, perpetuating Buddha's doctrine of rebirth in the earliest examples of printing known today. Through the conspiracy of Brahmanism and the rise of Islam, Buddhism slowly declined in India. The Arhats of the good law retired to Burma and Ceylon, and the Mughal emperors sat on the peacock throne. This political change, however, should not be regarded as indicating a decline in the belief in reincarnation. In fact, numerous mystical sects arose to perpetuate the doctrine. Buddhism itself became part of the cultural heritage of Asia, and as such its force has survived and will continue as long as men suffer, sorrow and die. The time will yet come when the West will realize that the light of Asia was in reality the light of the world. East and West bound together with the common bond of sorrow and uncertainty need the same answer to their problems. There is no answer but the law. Previous lives of Buddha. According to the doctrines of Buddhism, one who has achieved to the highest state of Buddhahood is able to remember his previous existences. Discoursing with his disciples, the Enlightened One explained the doctrine of rebirth by telling about his own former incarnations. 550 embodiments of the Buddha are related in the literature of his order. More than 100,000 years ago there dwelt in India a learned and righteous Brahmin named Sumedha. This wise and holy man, meditating on the mystery of rebirth, dedicated his future lives to the quest of that wisdom which should lead to liberation from the cycle of necessity. Sumedha reasoned thus, "Why should I not now cast off all remaining evil in myself and enter into nirvana? But let me not do so all for myself alone, rather let me also someday achieve omniscience and convey a multitude of beings in the ship of doctrine over the ocean of rebirth safely to the farther shore." In order that he might accomplish the liberation of all creatures from bondage to the law of rebirth, he who was to become the Buddha willed to be reborn in each of the orders of life. Not only did he take on the human form, but he incarnated as a deva, as an animal, even as a tree. It is said therefore, there exists not a particle of earth where the Buddha has not sacrificed his life for the sake of creatures. 33-34 Reincarnation. The cycle of necessity. In central Java, in a valley surrounded by active volcanoes, stands the Borobudur, one of Buddhism's most impressive shrines. The great structure is roughly pyramidal, each side more than 500 feet in length, with the central tower rising more than 150 feet. The galleries of this huge structure are ornamented with the most elaborate carvings. Here, hewn in deep relief, are scenes depicting the previous lives of the Buddha. In one remote existence he is depicted as a turtle bearing on his back shipwrecked sailors to shore. While many of the scenes are obviously mythological, representing only the piety of ancient Javanese sculptors, the force of the inference remains. The Great One is represented only as serving or teaching his fellow creatures. In the Jataka is described the time when the coming Buddha was incarnated as a royal elephant. In this incarnation he sawed off his own great tusks to please a jealous woman. Later she reincarnated, became a disciple of the Buddha, and attained sainthood. The last incarnation prior to the attainment of Buddhahood was as King Vesanthara, whose virtues are recounted at great length in the Jataka. After reigning for many years and achieving a great reputation for piety and generosity, the king died and the Buddha-elect retired into the Tushita heaven to await his final rebirth. When Buddha was in advancing years and his strength was failing, his disciples wondered why so great and learned a man should not be given strength to carry on his work. He was so necessary, there was none to take his place. The birds perched on his shoulders, the beasts of the jungle gath previous lives or Bup Ha 35 aired to hear his words. Why was one so virtuous, so full of wisdom, noble and gentle in every action, permitted to fade from among them? The master gathered them about him and explained that there was no escape from the laws of life and death except the ultimate nirvana. The virtuous man and the evil man both must come down at last to the grave. Wisdom does not bestow immortality upon the body. Rather it elevates the consciousness, giving patience and understanding. He further explained that this was his last life. He had fulfilled the purpose of his existence, he had kept the vow. All the streams of his ancient karma, the residue of past existences, had met and mingled in his present body. He must bear them to the end. Addressing the disciples, Buddha reminded them that he had not always been a virtuous man. Behind him were innumerable existences lived selfishly and without enlightenment. He had committed unnumbered errors. Therefore, even as he approached nirvana, he must fulfill the law, he must make right the wrongs with suffering and humility. Liberation comes only at the end of the sequence of existences. So he discoursed to them as recorded in Kashimandra's Kalpalata, telling them much of his previous lives and the karma which had descended from them. Once in the distant past he had been Sarveda, greedy for more profits, and because he had desired an inheritance had slain his step-brother. Turning to the disciples he commented, "It is even I, who having borne the burden of that sin in previous births, even now carry on my person its last relic." In another life the Buddha had been a merchant named Arthadatta who owned a ship full of rich merchandise. In 36 Reincarnation, the cycle or necessity other merchant who had lost his wealth was so jealous of Arthadatta that he attempted to scuttle his ship. So Arthadatta slew him. In another life he had been Chapalaka, a boy of bad manners. A holy man had come to the village and the boy had rudely knocked the begging bowl from the old man's hand and had ridiculed him. That is the reason, explained the Buddha, that he had that day returned from the village with an empty alms bowl. Then in another life there had lived Bharadvaha, whose brother was an arhat. So good and wise was this arhat that all the people loved and honored him. Bharadvaha became so jealous of his brother's good name that he caused a scandal to be circulated against him so that the holy man's reputation was damaged. This too remained to be expiated, the Buddha explained, and because he had been Bharadvaha, certain persons ignorant of the law spoke ill of him. In another life he had been Rinala, a man of bad morals who had been publicly executed. In still another he was a Brahmin who had incited the people against the Arhats. In still another existence he had been Uttara, a man who carried scandals. Again, he had been born as Tiktamukha, a doctor who, because his patient would not pay his bill, had permitted the man's child to die. Thus he discoursed about many existences and concluded, "Though I am now an immaculate Sambuddha, yet I am being visited by troubles. My body is subject to pains owing to the evil deeds of my former births." The Kalpalata continues, and the section concludes with the words, "The mendicants, hearing this discourse of the venerable sage, perceived that the consequences of karma can never be avoided." Previous lives or Bupha 37. There is nothing in the text of this work to imply that the description of past lives therein contained is to be regarded as allegorical. Buddha describes his previous personalities and the various accidents that befell them. For the most part, Buddhist sects acknowledge these accounts as literal, the authority for the doctrine being the canons collected and revised at the Great Council in 250 BC. It should be pointed out that various Buddhist sects of the present time differ considerably on the matter of interpretation. Each sect, founded upon the opinions of some revered saint, differs in emphasis, but with the exception of the Zen they agree in principle. The Zen sect was founded by the Arhat Bodhidharma who traveled to China from the great Indian university at Nalanda. It migrated to Japan where it flourishes today with many temples and is highly favored by the military class. This sect emphatically denies reincarnation. It even goes so far as the denial of the historical Buddha. To them the true Buddha is the realization of enlightenment, but they deny the existence of historical tradition. According to the Zen belief, Buddha's description of his former lives is purely allegorical and should be interpreted metaphysically. As Buddha, The principle of universal enlightenment exists everywhere and in everything, it is embodied in all form. Any man's history, therefore, may be the story of Buddha, and all creatures which have existed previously may be regarded as existences of the Buddha. It seems important at this time to contrast the Eastern and Western concepts of existence, with special reference to the matter of rebirth. Buddhism does not believe in the Superman. There is no place in its philosophy for the eternal 38 reincarnation, the psyche of necessity progress of the individual. The goal of human effort is not immortality, but absorption. The West, from Plato to the present time, teaches the immortality of the individual. It looks forward to the day when spiritual evolution will result in the production of a divine man and even ultimately the accomplishment of godhood. The individual, though growing greater, still remains himself. He becomes godlike, evolving through the various superior forms. In the East, eternity evolves through man. The individual ceases as soon as ignorance dies in him. His very personal existence is built on an ignorance complex. There is no immortal self. The very word I is an illusion. While both schools had their common origin in the great tradition of Aryan wisdom, they have branched apart, resulting in the establishment of two great civilizations, the Eastern and the Western. The Western school accepts reincarnation as a means of unfolding the individual, while the Eastern accepts reincarnation as a means of eliminating the individual. A confusion has arisen, however, due to the modern mingling of the East and West. This confusion has led to compromise which, while perfectly understandable, is nevertheless unfortunate. This compromise in the West had its beginning in the first centuries of the Christian era when law and faith struggled for dominance in the human mind. A simple, modern statement of the subject would be, what is to be the status of the doctrine of the forgiveness of sin in a world ruled by immutable law? Is it true that the new dispensation has destroyed the old law? Can a universal law ever be changed or modified by human desire, human faith, previous lives of BUPH 39 or human hope? The will to believe frequently leads man to the acceptance of irreconcilable doctrines. Nor is the East without blame in this respect. The simple, philosophic agnosticism of Buddha was too severe for average acceptance. Men wanted to hope. They wanted magic words that would cleanse them of their own misdeeds. The law of Buddha was for the arhats, for those who had entered the path, renounced the world, and dedicated themselves to the achievement of nirvana. To the rest the doctrine must have seemed cruel or a little heartless. Man was left entirely to his own devices, his destiny in his own hands, to make or break himself, with no God to receive his prayers, no devas to make his tasks easier, only law, only cause and effect, only the command for right action. There remained no color, no temples with richly appointed altars, no festivals and celebrations, no holy water to wash away the sins, only the living of innumerable lives to be what he makes of them, only bills to pay, and courage to struggle on under the load of karma. It is small wonder then that Buddha's simple gospel underwent almost immediate change. How his agnosticism gave birth to countless gods is history. Men seeking the Eastern way turned from the law to the priest. The old Buddhism is almost entirely gone, the mind of man could not endure the simple truth. The West presents a somewhat different picture. After the decline of the pagan mysteries there were centuries without philosophy, with nothing but blind faith in the substance of things unseen. The law of reincarnation came to the West, therefore, as a philosophy, as a justification of things already believed. Those who accepted it built it enthusiastic 40 reincarnation, the cycle or necessary ally, into the fabric of their creeds and doctrines, with the result that in the West rebirth no longer leads to nirvana but to the Superman. We all believe what we desire to believe, and those who desire to be immortal attempt to believe immortality into a fact. Reincarnation and karma as taught in Asia and in certain mystical Christian sects is approximately the same. It is the end to be achieved that differs. If the Eastern dream is a little more mature, more gentle with realization than the Western, perhaps it is because the East is old. Asia has lived through so many beliefs. It is tired with the very dream of existence. To one who has lived long, long life means little. To a world that has experienced much, suffered much, mellowed with ages of existence, our Western love of life may seem a little adolescent. The East was a great civilization while we still lived in caves. It was decadent before Europe was civilized. It has lived out life, it has seen the greater folly and can be tolerant of a new world that yet has much to learn. The Eastern saint no longer lives in this world, he dreams of space and peace. He knows that sometime we shall dream the same way when our culture is old and tired and weary with the fact of being. The Buddhist arhat in his saffron-colored robe wants none of the things we dream after. He desires neither wealth, nor power, nor honor. He desires only nirvana, which to him is indeed the end of waiting. The reborn lamas of Tibet. Tibet is ruled by a reincarnating theocracy. The principal lamas are revered as reincarnations of early saints, convert princes and kings, and terrestrial bodhisattvas who return life after life to govern their orders and participate in the affairs of state. The highest of these reborn abbots, the Dalai Lama, is the reincarnating bodhisattva of Alakita. He is the political head of the entire country, ruling his empire of monks and laymen from the great palace of the Potala at Lhasa. Of almost equal importance and even greater sanctity is the Tashi Lama, the spiritual head of the state. He is the embodiment of the Supreme Buddha Amitabha, and hence dwells far from the involvements of politics in the old monastery at Tashil Hunpo. The sovereignty of Tibet is now guarded by the British Crown. The Tibetans have no desire for foreigners in their land. They are afraid that their vast natural resources will be exploited. Within the last few years, however, a more liberal attitude has developed. The great palace at Lhasa has been equipped with electric lights, a radio station is in the process of being built, and the late Dalai Lama was the proud possessor of an automobile. The only reincarnate Lama outside of Tibet is the Lord Abbot of Peeping. Most persons desiring to enter Tibet make 442 reincarnation, the Sai of necessity the necessary arrangements through him. His temple contains the world-celebrated statue of the Lord Maitreya or the Buddha to come. The figure is more than 70 feet in height and is supposed to have been carved from a single tree. Though Tibet is now the headquarters of the High Church of Buddhism with the Dalai Lama as its pope, it was one of the last great countries to be converted to Buddhist doctrines. Prior to the 9th century the Tibetans were cannibals, and their religion was a form of shamanism called Bon. Human sacrifice was not uncommon, and the people lived in constant fear of the demons and spirits that harassed their daily lives. When Buddhism reached this strange northern land, its first tasks were arduous and dangerous. The demons had to be brought under the power of Buddhist law. The people, entirely unlearned, must be educated. The wandering militant tribes had to be subdued and settled in various areas. To the honor of Buddhism, let it be said that within 1 century books were being printed on the great Tibetan plateau. The native kings and princes had been converted, monasteries were being built, and the black hat priests of the Bon sects had been driven into the mountains. Cannibalism had ceased, human sacrifice was no more. Education had taken the place of ignorance, and thousands of young men had taken the yellow robe and had become scholars and teachers. It was the laws of reincarnation and karma that made this change. These two truths tamed a savage people and laid the foundation of the Tibetan civilization. Old beliefs are not easily forgotten, however. Elements of the old Bon faith mingling with the current of Indian Buddhist thought produced Tibetan Buddhism. Tuesday Rearn Lamas of Tibet 43. The cult of the reborn Buddhas did not arise until several centuries after the Buddhist conversion of Tibet. It was no part of the Indian cult. Grave changes had taken place in India. The Brahmans, rallying from their defeat, were stamping out Buddhism in its homeland. Many Indian priests fled to other countries. Some visited Tibet and settled there. The Tantric cult later migrated northward and played its part in modifying Tibetan Buddhism. The result is Lamaism, which can only be defined as a mingling of several beliefs in which Buddhist philosophy is the dominant note. The reincarnating hierarchy came into existence about the 13th century. From that time on its power has increased. The various Dalai Lamas and regents have so successfully promulgated the doctrine that an absolute religious dictatorship has resulted. According to the Lamaist doctrines, a reincarnating Buddha is re-embodied immediately. A delegation, therefore, is appointed to search for the new embodiment. A child must be found who was born at the exact time of the Lama's decease. Frequently great difficulties are met in the discovery and selection of this child. The members of the delegation watch for a sign or symbol to prove the re-embodiment. On one occasion, while searching for a successor to the Dalai Lama, the committee was privileged to behold a child but 6 months old arise in its crib and recite the Diamond Sutra. If no miracle occurs, various articles, including one that belonged to the previous embodiment, are held before the child. If it touches first the property of the deceased priest, this is regarded as an omen of re-embodiment. All other means failing, recourse is had to the drawing of lots. There is a certain democracy in the practice, because 44 reincarnation, the cycle or necessity the child selected as the embodiment may be found in a very humble peasant environment. The death of the late Dalai Lama was attended by unexpected complications. The re-embodiment could not be found. The entire hierarchy realized the gravity of the situation. It would mean the end of the system. Committees and delegations went as far as the northern provinces of India in search of a successor. But the re-embodiment was at last found, and amidst the great rejoicing of the people, the child was brought to Lhasa. Among the reincarnating lamas are several abbesses revered throughout the land for their piety and erudition. The abbess of Samding is the most celebrated. Her Tibetan name means the most precious power of speech, the female energy all good. In a heavily barred chamber which none may enter lie the mummified remains of all the previous incarnations of this venerable woman. Here one day her present body, embalmed, will be placed. It is the duty of this abbess, a duty which she may not evade, that once during each life she must enter into this gruesome tomb and pay honor to the moldering remains of her previous personalities. Lamaism is an example of the compromise in Buddhist teaching. While reincarnation is the great law, demonism still flourishes. Charms are made for every purpose. Invocations and formulas abound, and every incident of life is bound round with ceremony and sacrifice. There are prayers to be pasted over doors or placed under beds, there are rituals for the harvest, and mantrams to protect the herds. There are so many priests in Tibet, 1 out of every 4 persons being devoted to sacred orders, that they have become the Rearan Lamas or Tibet 45 indispensable element in every transaction. Theological exigencies have overwhelmed the gentle doctrines of the Buddha. A priest is an absolute necessity to protect the laity from the members of the various classes of evil spirits which leader ally outnumber the living, to read the future so that misfortunes might be averted, and to plan for a successful re-embodiment. The unborn must be guaranteed a happy existence, the dying must be guided across the mystery of death, and the dead must be assured of a pleasant interval in Sukhavati. The result is a constant round of religious life. Everything centers about a successful rebirth. But in the rush of ceremony the law of karma has small place. There are mantrams, the mere recitation of which will wipe out the karma of 100 lives. There are prayer wheels, the endless turning of which fills the very heavens with rejoicing. There are prayer flags which spread the good law by their fluttering. There are water wheels turning great drums of prayer that will assure 1,000 fortunate existences. The Bardo, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, is an invaluable instrument of rebirth in Tibet. When a reincarnate abbot is dying, a priest sits beside him reading the formulas of re-embodiment. It appears that while the transition of death is occurring, the mind of the dying man might be temporarily clouded, he might forget the technique of re-embodiment. Also, after death the sattva hovers for a short time about the body, and in this state it especially requires instruction. So the priest whispers in the ear of the dying man the necessary instructions to assure an immediate rebirth in an appropriate environment. It is believed that the sattva, hearing this instruction, immediately regains its poise and proceeds in an enlightened manner, thus escaping the illusion of transition. 46 Reincarnation, the cycle or necessity according to Schlagentweit in his Buddhism T and Tibet, confession of sin influences for a happy metempsychosis. The mention of the name of Buddha in the form of a petition ensures the forgiveness of all sins committed in previous existences. This approximately sums up the situation and speaks not only for Tibet, but to a great degree for China and Japan. How the forgiveness of sin got into Buddhism can be explained only by the psychology of the human mind. Man suspects that if he is not forgiven much he has small chance for salvation. In his article, Reincarnation in Tibetan Buddhism, Mead quotes the following: "The superior lamas and incarnate bodhisattvas generally keep diaries recording the events of everyday life. They recount their doings every week, month, year, and cycle of their lives to find out if their existence has not been one of steady spiritual progress. They argue that if one fails to enumerate his doings of yesterday or the past month, when all his faculties are in order, how would it be possible for him to keep intact the Purvajanmanusmrti, recollection of the events of one's former existences, when the faculties are deranged by death?" In the Tashiding Monastery at Sikkim is a fresco of the Bhava Chakra, or the Will of the Law. It is represented as divided into 6 compartments depicting the 6 states of being. The 3 divisions of the upper half of the will are called Jokas. The highest is the abode of the gods, the second the abode of the demigods, and the third the abode of men. The lower half of the will also has 3 parts, the lowest of which, Naraka, represents hell. The other 2 divisions represent the state of ghosts and the state of animals. The Rizorn Lamas of Tibet 47 After death the sattva migrates from the physical life into one of these 6 compartments according to actions and merits. If the sattva has been virtuous it may go to the abode of the gods where it will remain in rejoicing until its good karma is worn out. If it has been exceedingly evil the sattva may go to Naraka, an infernal condition where it will remain for a time according to its demerits. If the karma is of the best and most truly philosophic type the sattva will enter Naraloka, the abode of human beings, that is, it will be immediately reborn into the physical life. The sattva can achieve nirvana only while in the human form. Its karma must earn a human existence before emancipation is possible. Nirvana is not represented in any part of the wheel, the state of Buddhahood being shown by 2 figures outside of the wheel. He who has the key to nirvana has no place in the cycle of transmigratory existence. It will also be noticed that in each one of the 6 parts of the will is a small figure of the Buddha. It is believed that the Enlightened One assumed the illusional nature of the 6 worlds, and simultaneously entering into each of them preached the law, thus assuring the creatures of all the spheres ultimate salvation. In the Buddhist philosophy nothing can actually be lost. All living things must ultimately achieve nirvana. To the northern Buddhist the entire will with its 6 parts is illusional. The condition of being either a god, a ghost, a beast, or a demigod is merely part of the illusion of existence. The only reality is Buddhahood. The axis of the will of illusion is composed of 3 creatures representing stupidity, anger, and lust. These are the illusional emotions which bind the sattva to existence, and until these 3 fires die out there can be no emancipation. The Buddhism of Tibet, vs. Aeomi A5, v. and Y the Will of Life, to face p. 108. Picturing the Buddhist theory of the universe. 48 Reincarnation, the Psyche of necessity. In a Buddhist text translated from the Korean there is the following quotation: "The multitude of living beings transmigrate about the fiery house, and unless they free themselves from covetous desire, there are few who will reach the heavenly mansion." The fiery house is the sphere of desire. The heavenly mansion is nirvana. Around the edge of the Bhava Chakra are 12 compartments called the Nidanas. These are the 12 states of existence from birth to birth, and are arranged like the hours of a clock. This cycle from birth to birth has no end except nirvana. Most Buddhists, however, realize that the circle is really a cycle. Every rebirth is an improvement, and brings nearer the day of liberation. The Tibetans are a strange people, and in a strange way they have interpreted the laws of the Enlightened One. But in their own way, like all other people, they are seeking happiness, peace, and liberation. They are a good people, and among them are some very wise and enlightened lamas whose fundamental learning greatly exceeds that of the Western scholar. For the many, there are prayers and mantrams, but for the few who see beyond, there is the middle path, the road of Buddha that winding through the mysteries of rebirth finally comes to the great peace. Metempsychosis and Greek philosophy. The most celebrated of the early Hellenic thinkers was Pythagoras of Samos, a contemporary of Buddha, Confucius, Lao Tzu, and the last Zoroaster. Pythagoras traveled to India and was initiated into the rites of the Brahmans in the cave temples at Ellora and Elephanta. He was given a new name by the Brahmin priests, and is the first non-Brahmin in the history of the world to be accepted into their esoteric rites. He was called Yavanacharya, the Ionian master, and after he had established his school at Crotona, a number of Hindus came to study with him. Pythagoras brought from Asia the doctrine of metempsychosis or rebirth, and taught it esoterically to his disciples. Laertius says of Pythagoras, he first asserted, that the soul passing through the cycle of necessity lived at several times in different living creatures. Heraclitus states that Pythagoras remembered several of his previous lives and described them to a few of his most intimate followers. He had been the herald Ethalides, esteemed the son of Mercury, and in this body had written 2 theses, one deriding the instability of mortal existence. He was then born as Euphorbus the Trojan, and died before the gates of Troy, slain by Menelaus. In another life he had been born Hermotimus. He had then lived as Pyrrhus, a 4950 reincarnation, the Cyclera of necessity fisherman of Delos. It was after this life that he had been born as Pythagoras. He recognized at Argos the shield which he had used against Patroclus during the siege of Troy. He also distinguished, attached to a trophy of war in the temple of Juno, the spear of Atrides that formerly had killed him. Clearchus adds that Pythagoras in one of his previous existences had been a beautiful courtesan named Alce. Pythagoras described to certain of his disciples the experiences of their own former lives, but only to such as had purified their souls by the practice of his disciplines. He caused Milius of Crotona to remember that he had been Midas, son of Gordias, whereupon Milius went to Epire to perform the funeral rites for his own previous body. It is obvious from numerous records that Pythagoras definitely believed in metempsychosis and taught it to his disciples. Furthermore, he believed that it was possible for the highly evolved person to remember his previous existences. He taught that the soul was incarnated in a material form that it might gain new experience and purge itself from the errors of previous lives. In the Pythagorean philosophy, the human soul achieves liberation from the cycle of rebirth when it has attained a godlike nature. Pythagoras has been accused of teaching transmigration, but this is probably due to the defects in the few surviving texts that may be regarded as expressing the viewpoints of Pythagoras. None of his actual writings have survived. He most likely taught that those whose lives had been filled with evil deeds and destructive emotions were unworthy to reincarnate immediately in human form. Such souls, therefore, obsessed the astral bodies of animals and attempted to function through these ill-gotten vehicles. Later Plato clarified this point. Metempsychosis and Greek philosophy 5. There is also a belief that the animal bodies referred to by Pythagoras were the constellations of the zodiac through which the souls of men descended into birth. A man born under the rulership of the sign of Leo was said to have taken on the body of a lion, one under Taurus the form of a bull. This may explain a verse composed by Empedocles, which superficially might indicate a belief in transmigration. A boy I was, then did a maid become, a plant, bird, fish, and in the deep sea swum. As a disciple of Pythagoras, Empedocles was bound by an oath which prevented him from revealing the esoteric teachings of his master, and we may not be sure at this distant time the exact meaning which he intended. Plato was influenced by the teachings of Pythagoras, and a great part of the Platonic writings actually interpret the old Pythagorean tenets. Among other teachings of the Samian sage, Plato accepted the doctrine of metempsychosis. His profound universal genius recognized in the teachings of rebirth the most reasonable solution to the mystery of existence. Accepting, like Pythagoras, the immortality of the human soul, Plato declared that the soul was imprisoned in the body as an oyster within its shell. He regarded the material universe as a sphere of retribution, the real Hades, and taught that the periodic reincarnation of men into the material world was essential to the ultimate perfection of their divine nature. In the Phaedo, Plato writes, "Because every pleasure and pain, as if armed with a nail, fastens and rivets the soul to the body, causes it to become corporeal, and fills it with an open 52 reincarnation, the psyche of necessity ion, that whatever the body asserts is true. For in consequence of the soul forming the same opinions with the body, and being delighted with the same objects, it appears to me that it is compelled to possess similar manners, and to be similarly nourished, and to become so affected, that it can never pass into Hades in a pure condition, but always departs full of corporeal nature, and thus swiftly falls again into another body, and becoming as it were sown, is engendered, and lastly, that from these it becomes destitute of a divine, pure, and uniform association." At the end of his Republic, Plato describes how every soul fixes or chooses his own personality and fate at rebirth. Again in the Phaedo, let us consider whether the souls of men who have died are in the nether worlds or not. An old saying, truly, which I remember, says that when they go from here they are there, and return again here, and are again born from among the dead. Plato believed in spiritual evolution, and from the explicit nature of his statements obviously derives his authority from the sacred tradition of his time. He was an initiate of the Eleusinian mysteries, and could have held no belief contrary to these teachings. Speaking of Orpheus, Plato states that after the bard had been torn to pieces by the Ciconian women, he refused to be reborn again through the body of a woman, and therefore incarnated as a swan. Orpheus, the word itself meaning dark, was a man from the east who had brought wisdom to the Greeks, and established the mysteries not later than 1400 BC. In the Egyptian writings it is stated that Osiris, esoterically a body of knowledge as well as a god, was driven to Egypt from India in the form of a spotted bull. The metempsychosis and Greek philosophy. 53 Egyptians thus acknowledged the Eastern origin of their religion. Pythagoras, an initiate of 28 mystery schools including the Greek, Egyptian, Chaldean, and Hindu, affirmed that they taught precisely the same doctrine in all matters. Each of the schools, however, laid special emphasis upon one part of the doctrine. For example, the Egyptians excelled in geometry, the Chaldeans in astronomy, and the gymnosophists in self-abnegation. According to the rules of the mysteries, a doctrine held by the Brahmans could not be denied by the Greeks, though in any particular school special emphasis might be lacking. Thus Pythagoras may have gone forth and learned metempsychosis from the Brahmans, a doctrine not greatly developed by the Greeks, but the Brahmans as an esoteric school could not be denied by the Greeks in any of their major teachings. If the Brahmans taught metempsychosis, the Greek schools had to acknowledge it. The mystery schools were bound together by the most sacred ties, and under no condition could dispute each other's doctrines. Plato had desired to go to India, but wars raging throughout the Near East made his trip impossible. Therefore he was forced to accept the findings of Pythagoras concerning the Eastern mysteries. 300 years later, however, Apollonius, another Pythagorean, crossed Asia to the high Himalaya country and there received the same doctrine that had been given to Pythagoras. The foundations of religious differences are matters of emphasis. The points of common accord are gradually lost. The points of difference become more and more real. The result is modern religion, a corruption of the mysteries in which the concord of faith has been lost. 54 Reincarnation, the psyche of necessary. In the Phaedo, Plato puts the words concerning metempsychosis into the mouth of Socrates, which would imply that this great skeptic believed in rebirth. After the death of Plato, the academy was split up, one part remaining in the Lyceum and the other retiring to a cinder track under the leadership of Aristotle. Because of their constant walking of this track, the Aristotelian group was named the Peripatetic. Aristotle preserved the doctrine of rebirth among the other philosophic traditions that he had derived from Plato. Reincarnation was taught in the Platonic Academy for more than 9 centuries. The last successor for Plato, Damascius, was teaching this doctrine in 529 AD when the Christian Emperor Justinian closed the academy. After the decline of Greek culture, the doctrine of metempsychosis intrigued the Roman mind. Julian, the most philosophic of the Roman emperors and the only one of them to claim any scholarship, believed himself to be the reincarnation of Alexander the Great. Apollonius of Tyana, who lived in the 1st century AD, was a self-appointed Pythagorean. He subjected himself to the old disciplines, included the 5 years of silence in his austerities, wore his hair in the manner of the Pythagoreans, and dressed as they had dressed. Apollonius was the friend and confidant of several of the Roman emperors, a most zealous thaumaturgist, and an ardent follower of the doctrine of metempsychosis. When Apollonius was about 40 years of age, he made his celebrated journey to the fabled Mahatmas of India. Accompanied by Damis, his faithful disciple, he crossed the Ganges River and penetrated the land of the sages. He was metempsychosis and Greek philosophy 55 entertained as one long expected, and was invited to describe his previous lives. He declined because of the humbleness of his previous position, but being pressed admitted that he had been a sea captain who had saved his ship and cargo from pirates. The early centuries of the Christian era witnessed the rise of Neoplatonism in Alexandria. This city was a great pagan stronghold, a city of culture, of libraries, and philosophers. The most distinguished of the Neoplatonists were Ammonius-Saccas, Proclus, Plotinus, Iamblichus, and Porphyry. All these noble and sublimely illuminated men, among the greatest who ever lived upon the earth, accepted the doctrine of reincarnation as a fundamental law of Platonism. They acknowledged their admiration for the teaching of metempsychosis, and advanced this law as the perfect solution to the mystery of life. According to Porphyry, souls are given new bodies in keeping with their merits and demerits. Proclus believed himself to be the reincarnation of Micromachus, the Pythagorean. Iamblichus explains that men suffer here, not realizing that they are paying for previous mistakes in former lives. Plotinus would never reveal his natal day because he was ashamed of the evil deeds he had done which caused him to be reborn, and felt that no one should celebrate his infirmity. The Platonic recension in the 17th century defended with great learning the Platonic doctrine of rebirth. The Cambridge Platonists, especially Henry More, were conspicuous champions of the subject. Cudworth and Hume accepted the doctrine of rebirth, as did Fourier and Leroux. André Pézani, in a book called The Plurality of the Souls 56 Reincarnation, The Cycle of Necessity Lives, attempted to combine reincarnation with the Roman Catholic idea of expiation. Thomas Taylor, who wrote during the last quarter of the 18th century and the first 3 decades of the 19th, may well be termed the last of the Platonists. He dedicated his life to the restoration of Platonic philosophy, and gave the world the most enlightened of all translations from the writings of the Greek and Roman Platonists. In his Collectanea, Taylor writes in his introduction to the Chaldean oracles, they are of opinion, that the soul often descends into the world, through many causes, either through the defluxion of its wings, or through the paternal will. The Greeks were the most civilizing force in the Western world. The doctrine of metempsychosis passed from the Greeks to the early Christian Church, where it was widely accepted during the formative years preceding the Nicene Council. After an exhaustive study of Plato's works, Voltaire was induced to say that Plato was the true founder of the Christian Church. If Greece excelled other countries in philosophical excellence, it was because of her people's sublime beliefs concerning the origin and destiny of the gods, the universe, and man. Metempsychosis as a doctrine was an integral part of Greek learning, and the most powerful inspiration for the perfection of human nature to be found in their teachings. The Mystery ol Bitham, the imperial collection, the law of rebirth in China and Japan. Buddhism reached China about the 1st century of the Christian era. Here it met and mingled with the principal indigenous creeds, Taoism and Confucianism. The hopeless tangle that has resulted makes positive statements concerning Chinese religious beliefs exceedingly difficult. We know, however, that the Buddhist arhats and lohans, singing priests, brought with them the doctrines of reincarnation and karma, which found immediate acceptance, and since have become an integral part of Chinese religious thought. Under the patronage of benevolent emperors, monasteries and nunneries were built, libraries and schools were established, and Buddhism flourished like the green bay tree. The migration of Buddhism to China resulted in one of the most important discoveries ever made by man: the invention of the art of printing. According to Thomas Francis Carter *, the dynamic force that created the demand for printing was the advance of Buddhism. The exact date of the invention of printing is unknown. The oldest printed book known in the world today is a copy of Buddha's Diamond Sutra printed by Wang Qi in 868 AD. This was discovered in the * the invention of printing in China. 5758 Reincarnation, the Psyche or Necessity Cave of the Thousand Buddhas at Tun Huang by Sir Oriel Stein in 1907. The original is in the British Museum. The Diamond Sutra is the 9th section of the Mahaprajnaparamita Sutra and was highly regarded by the founders of ancient sects of Chinese Buddhism. It is in the form of a dialogue between Subhuti and the Buddha. There are numerous references to reincarnation. In one, the Buddha converses with his disciple thus: "Besides, Subhuti, I recall that during my 500 previous lives, I had used life after life to practice patience and to look upon my life humbly as though it was some saintly being called upon to suffer humility. Even then my mind was free from any such arbitrary conceptions of phenomena as my own self, other selves, living beings, and a universal self." Chang Chi, 522-597, was a devout student of the Dhyana school of early Chinese Buddhism and the founder of the Tiantai sect. In lectures given by him are numerous references to reincarnation. In his work on censorship over desires, he announces that such annoyances and suffering as are caused by inordinate emotions will continue to trouble, after the death of the body, in a following rebirth. He then quotes the Dhyana Sutra: "The continual sufferings of birth and death are due to thy sensual desires and lusts." The earliest Buddhist books to be used in China were written in the Sanskrit language but with Chinese characters. Therefore it naturally follows that the Chinese doctrines concerning rebirth and karma are essentially Indian, and deviate in no important particular from the precepts set forth in the Indian Buddhist swaras. The Diamond Sutra by Bhikshu Waitau and Dwight Goddard. The law or Rizumru in China and Japan. 59 Willoughby Mead in his Chinese Ghouls and Goblins shows how the doctrine of reincarnation has become part of the mythology and folklore of the Chinese people. There are celebrated fables involving rebirth under strange and curious conditions. Considered together, these prove that the doctrine of rebirth has a definite place in the subconscious minds of the Chinese people. China is dominated by tradition, and that which becomes part of the tradition influences to some degree the life of every Chinese. A famous Chinese intellectual philosophizing on the mystery of life penned the following verse: "After I depart, I cast no look behind, still wed to life, I still am free from care. Since life and death in cycles come and go, of little moment are the days to spare. Thus strong in faith I wait, and long to be one with the pulsings of eternity." Po Chui 800 AD. From China, Buddhism migrated to Korea. The King of Korea requested of the Emperor of China a complete edition of the Buddhist sutras. The request was granted and the doctrines of Buddha found favor among the Koreans. They accepted the faith and embraced the doctrines of reincarnation and karma. It appears that the Koreans invented movable type. This greatly increased the efficiency of printing, and materially contributed to the spread of Buddhism. When Buddhism reached Japan, it found there an especially fertile field. It mingled to some degree with Shintoism, the native faith of Japan. Today Japan supports 360 reincarnation, the cycle or necessary great religions, Buddhism, Shintoism, and Christianity. As early as the 13th century the Buddhist sacred books, including the Diamond Sutra, were printed in Japan. Again enjoying the favor of princes, Buddhism spread throughout the islands and divided into numerous branches. These sects or schools of Buddhist thought derive their indirect inspiration from India, but pay special reverence to local saints. Thus the Shinjin reveres Kobo Daishi, and the Nichiren derives its name from the Japanese Buddhist saint who was its founder. The wide diffusion and intermingling of Buddhist thought in Japan makes a brief summary of their various doctrines impossible. It is safe to say, however, that with the exception of the Zen, all the Buddhist sects in the Japanese islands accept reincarnation and karma in some form. It is most frequently compromised by the belief in the efficacy of charms, prayers, and mantrams. The Christian doctrine of vicarious atonement finds its parallel in several Japanese Buddhist sects. Whether this is due to the influence of early Dutch missionaries must remain conjectural. Many Japanese Buddhists as individuals have severed their relations with their native sects and give allegiance only to the Indian school and the original teachings of Buddha. Japan borrowed much of its philosophy from China, including painting, sculpturing, music, the drama, and flower arrangement, which has come to be a fine art. To the Japanese Buddhist, law is made manifest through natural and simple things. Their innate love of beauty has affected their philosophy, but their intuitive grasp of the deeper Buddhist doctrines cannot be denied. Their folklore likewise abounds in references to metempsychosis and transmigration. Reincarnation in Islam. Prior to the advent of the Prophet Muhammad, the people of Arabia practiced the rites of idolatry and Sabaism. They worshipped strange gods, the stars, the constellations, the decans and degrees of the zodiac. When Muhammad entered the Kaaba at Mecca, he destroyed the 360 gods whose images stood within the confines of the holy place. The gods belonged to the astrology which had survived in Arabia from the time of the Chaldean Magi. In the introduction to his translation of the Quran, George Sale refers to the pre-Islamic belief in reincarnation. Some believe in metempsychosis, and that of the blood near the dead person's brain was formed a bird named Tama which once in 100 years visited the sepulchre. It is evident from this statement that the beliefs of this earlier people were most irregular. The Quran is the final authority of Islam. The enthusiastic Muslim declares that not one line, not one character, not even a single punctuation mark of the Quran has ever been changed. They advance this book as the only scriptural writing in the world that has not suffered the corruption of revision or translation. The Quran contains one surah that is interpreted by numerous Muslim sects as authority for the belief in metempsychosis. God generates beings, and hence they return to 6162 reincarnation, the cycle of necessity him. This statement appears to be specific and incapable of other interpretation, but it is only fair to say that reincarnation is a disputed point in Islamic orthodoxy. Soon after the death of Muhammad, mystical religious cults began to spring up in Arabia. These cults accepted the absolute authority of the Quran, but desired to search further and more deeply into the mystery of God. Some of these esoteric groups were monastic, others lived in communities. Various sects were distinguished only by words and signs by which the members might know each other. Muhammad never realized that his religion would extend beyond the boundaries of Arabia. He had given it to his own people. But the rise of the Caliphate resulted in a wide diffusion of Islamic culture. By the 9th century of the Christian era, the principal writings of Plato, Aristotle, and the Neoplatonists had been translated into the Arabic language and were accorded a high degree of veneration and respect. Thus the doctrine of metempsychosis reached Islam from Greece and Egypt. According to George Footmore, reincarnation is fundamental to the doctrine of Imam as held by the Shia Muslims. It was developed in a characteristic form by the Ismailis, and is a cardinal doctrine of Babism. The Druzes believe that the souls of the righteous, Druzes, pass at death into progressively more perfect embodiment till they reach a stage at which they are reabsorbed in the Godhead, while the wicked are born in lower condition. There is also evidence that some Islamic sects hold to the doctrine of transmigration. John P. Brown writes, "The Betashis believe that God is in all things, and that the soul, after its separation from the human frame, may enter into reincarnation in Islam 63, the body of an animal, for which reason they are unwilling to kill any living creature, lest it contain the soul or spirit of a late human being. *. There is also a belief in Islam that certain prophets and sages return periodically to the material life. The author of the Dervishes writes, "It is this belief in the reappearance of holy personages which gave rise to the religion of the Druzes, whose founder, by Amir Allah, after having already existed in this life in another form, returned as the Caliph and Reformer of Egypt, and, having mysteriously disappeared, will reappear at a future period. The order of the Mavivites, more commonly known as the Whirling Dervishes, was founded by Mevlana Jalaluddin Muhammad al-Baqir Rumd. This celebrated mystic had already developed extraordinary spiritual powers by his 6th year. In his Mesnavi-i Manavi, Book 4, Jalaluddin writes, "A stone I died and rose again a plant I died and rose an animal, I died an animal and was born a man. Why should I fear?" This is undeniably a statement of progressive re-embodiment, and coming as it does from the most famous and revered of Islamic prophets, must be accepted as a statement of orthodox belief. To quote again from John P. Brown's unique work, in a small treatise by a learned sheikh of the Mevlevi order, *the Dervishes. 64 Reincarnation, the cycle of necessity lately deceased, there is a clear and distinct explanation of the spiritual existence as believed by them. He explains and draws his proofs from the Quran, that all mankind were created in heaven, or in one of its celestial spheres, long before God created the present one, and perhaps any of the planets, that in this world they continue to exist in various conditions before assuming that of humanity, and that moreover they will continue hereafter to exist in other forms before they finally return to their original ones in the sphere of blessedness. He declares that the spirit of man has no knowledge in this life of its condition or existence in any previous one, nor can it foresee its future career, though it may often have vague impressions of past occurrences which it cannot define strongly resembling those happening around it. The present trend in religion is away from metaphysical speculation and toward a general skepticism. The more esoteric doctrines are disappearing in favor of a smug materialistic agnosticism. This is true of Islam as of other world movements. The modern intellectual Muslim ignores the inference of rebirth in the sacred writings. The result is that, like most Christians, he is dominated by an unbelief which detracts greatly from the dignity of living. Reincarnation among the American Indians. In matters of philosophy and faith, the American Indian is by nature an individualist. His convictions are influenced profoundly by his interpretation of the experiences of daily life, and by the visions and other mystical extensions of consciousness resulting from vigil, fasting, prayer, and meditation. Members of the same tribe may differ widely in their beliefs. Religious tolerance is general, and nonconformity brings no reproach if a man practices his beliefs with sincerity. Therefore, when an ethnologist asks some old sachem or an outstanding tribal citizen for a summary of the religion of his people, the learned elder, as likely as not, will elucidate his personal opinions on the subject. Thus many differing accounts may be secured from a single group. Due to this complication, all broad statements covering Indian theology are subject to a variety of exceptions. In his North American mythology, Dr. Hartley B. Alexander makes a cautious generalization of the Indian attitude toward the doctrine of successive lives. Belief in the possibility of rebirth is general, he writes, although some tribes believe that only young children may be reincarnated, and certain of the Californians who practice cremation bury the bodies of children that they may the more easily be reborn. Referring to Arctic tribes, the same author notes, birth and 65-66 reincarnation, the cycle of necessity death, in Eskimo conception, are less a beginning and an end than episodes in life. Souls may be born and reborn both as man and as beast, and some have been known to run the whole gamut of the animal kingdom before returning to human shape. Ordinary human souls are reborn as men. Some Indian nations have reincarnation or transmigration as an essential tenet of tribal doctrine, while others have only vestiges of the concept. Certain Greenland tribes, for example, believe that the soul of a dead relative will enter the body of a newborn babe, guarding and instructing the child until it reaches maturity, when its own soul takes control. Several tribes hold that scalping prevents rebirth, as the spiritual nature is connected with certain locks of hair. The Indians of eastern United States are convinced that the after-death world of the red man is exclusively for the use of their own race. The white man has a different heaven. Because of their admiration for George Washington, These Indians say that he has a special house just outside the door of the Indian spirit land. Medicine priests who have left their bodies and journeyed along the path of souls report that the Great White Father is having a splendid time in his fine home. The Cherokee recognized no essential difference between the spirits of human beings and those of animals. All the kingdoms of nature shared a common immortality. Although the animal belonged to a lower order of intelligence than man, and its body might properly be used for food, the spiritual principle which animated the brute form was indestructible. It was necessary to kill animals that men might live, but these four-footed younger brothers had their reincarnation among the American Indians' 67 place in the afterlife. The hunter did not actually kill the animal, he only deprived it of a body for a short time. The Indian never hunted for sport, and when he killed the body of a deer or other wild creature, he offered prayers to its spirit, and honored its memory with sacred rites and ceremonies. In his Myths of the Cherokee, James Mooney explains the philosophy of these Indians as it relates to this interesting subject. The hunter is pardoned through a peculiar doctrine of reincarnation, according to which, as explained by the shamans, there is assigned to every animal a definite life term which cannot be curtailed by violent means. If it is killed before the expiration of the allotted time, the death is only temporary and the body is immediately resurrected in its proper shape from the blood drops, and the animal continues its existence until the end of the predestined period, when the body is finally dissolved and the liberated spirit goes to join its kindred shades in the darkening land. See the 19th Annual Report of the Bureau of American Ethnology. The numerous tribes of the Sioux Nation incline toward a belief in rebirth. Of this group, James Owen Dorsey writes, some of these metempsychosists go so far as to aver that they have distinct recollections of a former state of existence and of the passage into this. In another place he adds, they believe in the transmigration of souls. Some of the medicine men profess to tell of what occurred to them in bodies previously inhabited, for at least 6 generations back. See a study of Stwan cults. Most authors do not distinguish clearly between reincarnation and transmigration, thus further clouding an already obscure field of research. Enough can be gathered, however, to prevent serious misunderstanding. A clearly defined 68 reincarnation, the cycle of necessity trend is noticeable, which would indicate that the belief in rebirth is more prevalent among certain classes of Indians than among particular tribes. It is most likely to be found among the shamans, priests, prophets, medicine men, and seers. These mystics have examined into the spiritual mysteries of life, and like the yogis of India claim to possess faculties and powers by which they can explore into the secret workings of nature. They accompany souls into the shadow life, wander about on the borderland which divides the living from the dead, and can see the life principles entering and leaving the physical body. Occasionally those not consecrated to the holy life may enjoy visions or mystical experiences. As among the ancient Greeks, there are numerous accounts of warriors who seemingly have died, and after a time return to life. The words of such men have great authority, and the reports which they bring back of their adventures while out of the body become part of the tribal tradition. It is not unusual for these resurrected ones to turn from their ordinary pursuits and take on the duties of priests and spiritual advisors. Most Indian religious cults, like that of the ghost shirts, begin with prophets who have returned from the dead. In The Soul of the Indian, Charles Alexander Eastman, Ohisa, a member of the Sioux Nation, who wrote extensively on Indian culture, refers to reincarnation thus: many of the Indians believed that one may be born more than once, and there were some who claimed to have full knowledge of a former incarnation. Such recollections of previous existences nearly always resulted from mystic practices or other unusual circumstances. One famous medicine man gained his powers after being struck by lightning. Reincarnation among the American Indians. 69. Some years ago, Paul Radin carried on extensive researches among the members of the Winnebago tribe of Wisconsin. He found that by the belief in reincarnation, the Winnebago entirely bridge the gulf between life and death. To live again is the greatest desire of the Winnebago, and practically every secret society holds this out as the lure to the outsider. If you join the medicine lodge you will become reincarnated, they say, and the other ritualistic organizations make the same claim. But not only by joining an organization is it possible to be reincarnated. If you live an upright life, if you die on the battlefield, reincarnation also awaits you. Dr. Radin was fortunate enough to secure directly from a Winnebago shaman an account of 3 of this wise man's previous lives. The shaman, who is identified by the initials TC, said that he had been killed, while still a lad, by a hostile war party. He did not know that he was dead until he found his own body among the slain. He was then taken to the spirit land where he lived with an old couple until the desire to be reborn came over him. The chief of the spirit village told him that he could go back to earth and obtain revenge on the tribe that had killed his relatives and himself. He was taken into what seemed to be a room, where he could hear little children playing outside. He wanted to join them, so he went through a door. There was a rush of cold air, and he began to cry, and he knew that he was being born from a woman's body. In that life TC grew up to be a great warrior, and he slew many men and revenged himself upon his enemies. He died of old age, and left his body without pain. He even watched the people as they buried his remains. He had much pleasure in the afterlife, and even talked face to 70 reincarnation, the cycle of necessity face with Earthmaker. There were spirits about, and he was like them. After a time TC again returned to the physical world, and it was in this latest incarnation that he told his story to Dr. Radin, remarking, "I am going through the same that I knew before." The peyote cult has many followers among the Winnebago. They eat the peyote or make a liquid from it which they drink. The mezcal, or peyote, is a small cactus, used medicinally as a stimulant and antispasmodic. With the Indians the effect is to produce visions and a temporary clairvoyance, and the plant is also believed to have great curative powers. The peyote cult denies the doctrine of reincarnation, and this has caused ill feeling between the old tribal shamans and the new cult. Those Winnebago who will have nothing to do with the peyote people claim that the use of this plant destroys the spirit, and the addicts will not be reborn again but will die utterly. It is fortunate, indeed, that Dr. Radin has been able to continue his researches into the mystical philosophy of the Winnebago. In 1945 he published the sacred ritual drama of these Indians under the title, The Road of Life and Death. Making use of the old belief in reincarnation, the medicine priests interpreted life as a mystical road to the heaven worlds and back again ad infinitum. In his new book Dr. Radin tells us that the initials TC stand for the Venerable Seer Thundercloud. Not only did this wise man remember his past lives, he recalled also his previous initiation into the secret rites of the Spirit Road. In the ritual, Earthmaker, the Great Spirit, promised that if the ceremonies of the rites were properly performed the reincarnation among the American Indians 71 initiate would have more than one life. Earthmaker said, "I will always keep the door through which he may return to earth open to him. When he becomes reincarnated he can live wherever he wishes. He can return to the earth as a human being, or he can join one of the various bands of spirits, or, again, if he wants to, he can become one of the beings who live under the earth." Dr. Radin sums up the psychological aspect of the doctrine of rebirth as held by the Winnebago thus: with the belief in reincarnation, the priest-thinker could do much more. Here a kind of continuum already existed. The priest-thinker had merely to develop the concept of a continuing consciousness. Thus the first attribute of divinity, permanence, was on its way to accomplishment. This permanence was further enhanced and fixed by having an individual born again into the same family and reliving, in every detail, his previous existence. The Winnebago were led to the belief in the plurality of lives by the pressure of adversity and affliction. They were in much the same position as the white man of today. The only escape from war, crime, sorrow, and misery was through the strengthening of the internal spiritual self. Man must have a philosophy of living that explains the obvious tragedy of the world and at the same time proves that the human being can live well and attain security by a high standard of personal conduct. All mature civilizations are confronted with this problem of universal ethics. In his delightful book, What the white race may learn from the Indian, George Wharton James summarizes the Amerindic philosophy of death. The Indian, he writes, believes in immortality without any admixture of complex 72 reincarnation, the cycle or necessity theological ideas. His is a simple faith which he accepts as he accepts life. He believes that when he dies his spirit goes to its new life just as at birth he came into this life. When death approaches he faces it with calmness, equanimity, and serenity. Those who are left behind may wail for their loss, but the one who departs asks for and receives no sympathy. In matters of spiritual conviction the Indian was by nature a silent man. He held his mystical beliefs close to himself and the members of his tribe. He had no instinct to convert others, to him each man must find his own spirit path, and having found his way must live it gloriously and courageously to the end. After contact with the Europeans, the Indian became even more reticent on the subject of religion. The white man was always trying to force his beliefs upon the Amerins, condemning all faiths but his own, but applying to himself very little religion of any kind. Because of these critical attitudes the European closed in his own face the sanctuaries of the American Indian esoteric tradition. As a result, very few Anglo-Saxons have any conception of the more profound aspects of the red man's mystical theology, occult philosophies, and disciplines. As the Amerindic nations had no written languages, it is not possible to restore this ancient learning from the crude pictographs which are the only literary remains of the old times. The lore of the tribes survives only in the memory of the old men and the medicine priests. If these shamans are silenced by the white man's criticism and contempt, the wisdom of the tribes dies with them, and is lost beyond all hope of recovery. This has already happened in a number of cases and, sad to relate, even those ethnologists and anthropologists who have devoted the best years of their reincarnation among the American Indians' 73 lives to research among the surviving tribes are seldom interested in Amerindian metaphysics. Vestiges of a belief in reincarnation are to be found throughout the North American tribes, but only the initiates of the various mystical societies have a complete understanding of the doctrine. Under these conditions a complete statement is impossible at this time. Drive S. Baring Gould explains the principle of rebirth as it was held by early peoples. Although his statement is general, it applies accurately to the speculations of the Indians of North America. The human soul, he observes, with its consciousness of infinity, seemed to be something already perfected in a pre-existing state, something which had gone through a succession of phases of existence, and which would undergo a further succession. In the dream of metempsychosis we may trace the yearnings and gropings of the soul after the source whence it derived its consciousness, counting its dreams and hallucinations as gleams of memory, reflecting acts which had taken place in a former state of being. After death, the translation of the soul was supposed to continue. See the origin and development of religious belief. So complete was the destruction of the religions, philosophies, and historical records of the Indians of Central America by the Spanish, that the mystical tradition among these nations appears to be hopelessly lost to modern scholars. There are hints, however, such as the casual observation of Bernard Picart in his religious ceremonials. In summing up the metaphysics of the Incas of Peru, this learned Frenchman writes, they believed that all who were born in a material world would live again in a material world. 74 Reincarnation, the cycle of necessiry. Although no scriptural writings of the Mayas or Aztecs have been decoded, and it is impossible therefore to quote an authoritative text, it is almost certain that they believed in rebirth. No nation of the ancient world reached a degree of culture equal to that of the peoples of Mexico and Central America without discovering the law of reincarnation. This is the more probable when we realize that esoteric societies reached a degree of refinement in Central America closely approaching the mysteries of Greece and Egypt. Metempsychosis is an essential teaching of the initiation rites of all the enlightened nations of antiquity. It is now held by leading anthropologists that the mound builders of the Mississippi Valley area of the United States were emigrants from the regions inhabited by the Aztecs, Toltecs, and Mayas. As these emigrants were aware of reincarnation, it would support the opinion that rebirth was taught in the land of their origin. While Diego de Landa was Bishop of Yucatan, he wrote at considerable length about the customs and religion of the natives. Landa pointed out that the Mayas were the only people of the Indies who practiced the rite of baptism. According to the bishop, this ceremony was expressed by a word which means be born again or another time. As the Mayas had no concept of original sin, and to them baptism was protective rather than purificatory, it is quite possible that rebirth is implied by the word selected to describe the ritual. Henry Rowe Schoolcraft, contrasting the religious beliefs of the Vesperic, or North American tribes with those of the Anahuac nations, writes as follows of the Aztec religion. They upheld the theory of the transmigration of souls, and believed that these souls entered into and animated the reincarnation among the American Indians 75 clouds, noble beasts and birds of beautiful plumage and sweet song, possessing the privilege, while in this state, of ascending to heaven, or of descending to the earth. Many of the Greeks agreed with this conviction, affirming that the decarnate spirit could choose to be reborn in either human or animal form. Wherever transmigration was taught, metempsychosis usually was implied in a modified or limited form. The Jivaros, a tribe of Indians inhabiting eastern Ecuador, still have a belief similar to that of the Aztecs. The Jivaros, writes M.W. Sterling, believe that after death they are reborn in various forms of animal life. A warlike Curica elder becomes a jaguar when he dies and goes to live in the forest near enemy tribes in order that he may continue his vengeance toward them. It is believed that children under the age of puberty change into small birds. When Anguasha was asked if he expected to become a jaguar, he said no, that he hoped to be a chicken hawk, because he was very fond of eating chickens and birds. See historical and ethnographical material on the Jivaro Indians, Smithsonian Bulletin 117. In his description of the Indian mental type in general, and applying to both hemispheres, Schoolcraft, the first great authority on the Amerinds, makes the broad statement, they also believe in the general doctrine of metempsychosis, or transmigration of souls. The notions of the northern tribes on this subject are shown incidentally in the oral tales which I first began to collect among the Algonquins and Dakotas in 1822, and which are embodied in algic researches. The soul of man is seen, in these curious legends, to be thought immortal and undying, the vital spark passing from one object to another. It has been shown that 76 reincarnation, the cycle or necessity, their oral traditions contain abundant evidence of the idea of metempsychosis, or transmigration of the soul through a wandering series of existences, human and brutal. 4 is the sacred number of the American Indians. According to the esoteric teachings of the Dakota tribe, a medicina priest may be born 4 times as a man. Between lives he dwells with the gods and receives instruction in magic and healing. He may choose where he wishes to be reborn, and retains a memory of his adventures in the spirit worlds between lives. After 4 incarnations he returns to space. See Gideon Pond, in Schoolcraft's Indian Tribes of the United States. A consideration of information available indicates that the American Indians, as a group, were approaching a philosophical concept of reincarnation. They were paralleling closely the Greek and Hindu unfoldment of religious conviction. In each case, the realization of the immortality of the human spirit led first to the belief in the survival of consciousness as a ghost or disembodied being. Later, as the mental outlook broadened, the ghost returned and inhabits some form, animate or inanimate. This helped the primitive man to explain the intelligence which he sensed about him in nature, and prepared the way for the final conviction that the human spirit could fulfill its destiny only in a body as good, or better than the one previously occupied. Reincarnation and the Old Testament. The Old Testament, as it has descended to us in various translations of the Bible into the English language, is for the most part the production of dubious scholarship. The King James Version is especially rich in errors, including numerous changes to improve the literary style. The use of biblical quotations to sustain various interpretations, therefore, is open to severe criticism. According to E.D. Walker, although most Christians are unaware of it, reincarnation is strongly present in the Bible, chiefly in the form of pre-existence. While this opinion is held by many students of reincarnation, it is only fair to say that the doctrine of pre-existence as taught in Jewish and Christian sacred writings does not imply reincarnation, nor is it the premise necessarily leading to reincarnation. It does not follow that pre-existence implies a continuity of physical incarnations. The most usual interpretation of pre-existence is that the soul, though individualized in a remote time, has dwelt in a divine body with God in a heavenly state or world. This belief has been held by many nations of the ancient world and has survived to this time in the opinion of numerous religious sects. A typical instance of confusing pre-existence with reincarnation is found in Jeremiah 1:5. The word of the Lord 7:78 Reincarnation, the cycle of necessity came unto me saying, Before I formed thee, I knew thee, and before thou camest forth, I sanctified thee, and ordained thee a prophet. Vulgate. There is nothing in this verse to indicate that Jeremiah had ever lived upon the earth before. There is a decided statement of predestination, but nothing of rebirth. There is a peculiar belief sustained by the prophetical books that by a special dispensation certain of the prophets and patriarchs might return to the world in times of great tribulation and spiritual change. Malachi 4:5 reads, Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. This statement may seem at first to suggest reincarnation. The prophet and patriarchs having returned to God, became, as it were, elders before the Almighty throne, and might be sent forth by the divine will to minister unto its creatures. This is not a cycle of cause and effect, however, but a dispensation unto the elect. The prophet returns not to gain new experience and pay off the debts of a previous existence, but merely to bear witness, to carry a special message from the Creator. Another aspect of the matter is presented in the apocryphal Book of Wisdom 8:19-20, And I was a witty child, and had received a good soul. And whereas I was more good, I came to a body undefiled. Many ancient peoples believed that man descended into his present state from a previous existence for which the present life was either punishment or reward. These previous lives, however, were not lived upon this visible, corporeal earth, but in some mystical place like the abode of the angels. As the evil angel was cast from the presence of the Lord for sin committed in the heavenly world, in like manner men may be punished reincarnation and the Old Testament 79 for a time for the vices of another state. As long as birth into this world is at the discretion of God and not the result of immutable law, the true doctrine of reincarnation one's not intended. There is a possible hint of reincarnation in Proverbs VU 22-31. The Lord possessed me in the beginning of his way, before his works of old. I was set up from everlasting, from the beginning, or ever the earth was, when there were no fountains abounding with water. Before the mountains were settled, before the hills was I brought forth, while as yet he had not made the earth, nor the fields, nor the highest part of the dust of the world. When he prepared the heavens, I was there. Then I was by him, as one brought up with him, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him, rejoicing in the habitable part of his earth, and my delights were with the sons of men. Unfortunately, again the statements are inconclusive. Solomon declares himself to have existed with God before the beginnings of the world, also that he was an eternal being in whom there was neither beginning nor end. If we accept the eternity of the soul as proof of reincarnation, we are assuming much. The fact that reincarnation is not specifically mentioned in the Old Testament according to our present versions is no proof that the doctrines of reincarnation and karma were not accepted. The most ancient existing fragments of the Old Testament are in Greek, not earlier than the 2nd century BC. It is impossible to dogmatize upon a work the original of which is virtually lost. It is quite possible that the doctrine of reincarnation has been edited out of the Bible so that only fragmentary, imperfect, and distorted remnants ad reincarnation, the cycle of necessity of the belief, have survived in such verses as we have quoted. A simple illustration of the confusion resulting from translation alone will indicate the general difficulty. Psalms XC1 in the Authorized Version reads, Lord, Thou hast been our dwelling place in all generations. The same verse translated from the French Bible reads, "Lord, thou hast been for us a refuge from age to age." In the Douay translation of the Vulgate the verse is changed to Psalms 6:1, and reads, "Lord, thou hast been our refuge from generation to generation." Superficially it might appear that the differences are immaterial, but such actually is not the case. All generations is not synonymous with from age to age, nor from generation to generation. Each of these terms has a separate and distinct significance, and the French translation implies the possibility of rebirth which is absent from both of the other translations. When we realize that each verse of the Bible is capable of several different translations, the magnitude of the dilemma becomes apparent. Regardless of the testimony of the Old Testament and the Talmud, which at best is uncertain, there is ample evidence that the doctrine of reincarnation occupied a prominent place in the religious tradition of the Jews. In some cases the belief in transmigration occurs. This belief may have originated with Pythagoras, who founded a secret sect in Lebanon in the 6th century BC. Rabbi Elias declares that the doctrine of metempsychosis was believed in and approved by the heads of his religion. Rabbi Manasseh ben Israel in his Nishmath Hayim writes with authority, "The belief or the doctrine of the transmigration of souls is a firm and infallible dogma accepted reincarnation and the Old Testament 81 by the whole assemblage of our church with one accord, so that there is none to be found who would dare to deny it." Indeed, there is a great number of sages in Israel who hold firm to this doctrine so that they made it a dogma, a fundamental point of our religion. The Talmud states that the soul of Abel passed into the body of Seth, and from that into the body of Moses. In the mystic commentaries it is explained that Cain died and reincarnated as the Egyptian who was killed by Moses, thus paying the karma of his previous evil action. Job was the reincarnation of Terah, the father of Abraham, and Samson possessed the soul of Japhet. There was considerable amplification of this curious research. Adam's soul was reborn in the body of David and will come again as the promised Messiah. The soul of an adulterer might be reborn as a camel, and this would have occurred to David had he not repented of his evil ways. Rabbi Manasseh further taught that God never allows the souls of men to be destroyed, and if they sin he sends them back into the world to be purified by metempsychosis. The Zohar, the most mystical and metaphysical of Jewish books, by some attributed to Simeon ben Yohai, taught definitely that men must be reborn until they have achieved a degree of perfection which will make possible their reabsorption into God. According to Meyer, the promised land of Jewish mysticism is the nirvana of Buddhism, the ultimate return to the divine nature. Josephus, the historian of the Jews, in the Jewish Wars, 2:8, mentions reincarnation. They say that all souls are incorruptible, but that the souls of good men are only removed into other bodies. Josephus, while defending the fortress of 82 reincarnation, the Psyche of necessity Hodapatha, took refuge in a cave with some 40 soldiers who desired to commit suicide that they might not fall into the hands of the Romans. Josephus admonished them, "Do ye not remember that all pure spirits who are in conformity with the divine dispensation, live on in the loveliest of heavenly places, and in course of time they are again sent down to inhabit sinless bodies?" By the words of Josephus the soldiers were strengthened and resisted the impulse toward self-destruction. Josephus also writes that the belief in metempsychosis was familiar to the Pharisees, a statement sustained by the opinions of Tertullian and Saint Justin. The teaching was revived by the post-Christian Kabbalists, and flourished during the Middle Ages, especially among Jewish scholars. The mystical sects of Syria, the Therapeutae, the Essenes, the Nazarenes, the Gebers, and the Jonanites, accepted various forms of the doctrine of rebirth. Philo-Judaeus, a great student of Plato, evolved a complete system of pre-existence and reincarnation, and Porphyry, the Jewish Neoplatonist, believed in and wrote on the subject. By examining the various commentaries, we discover that the true doctrine of rebirth as the outworking of the law of cause and effect is completely stated. Therefore, we may properly include the Jewish people among the races and nations who have believed in metempsychosis. There is a clear statement that rebirth is the way toward perfection, the means of accomplishing the end of liberation, and also that it is a proper medium for the administration of divine retribution. Reincarnation and the New Testament. The New Testament also suffered greatly from mistranslation and interpolation. Nor would it be proper to ignore the deletions which have peculiarly mutilated the epistles. The true authors of the New Testament are unknown, and the present collection of writings is but a small part of the manuscripts in circulation prior to the Nicene Council. There are vestiges of the doctrine of metempsychosis in the New Testament, but as in the case of the older writings, most of the quotations advanced concern only pre-existence. The Christian belief that Christ was consubstantial with the Father is inadmissible as evidence of metempsychosis. John 8:58 is typical. Jesus said unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am. In the first place, it was affirmed by the early church that Christ was no man but the very person of the Father. This being true, it was impossible for Christ to suffer, dic, or be resurrected as a man, and the laws which govern these theological mysteries are not applicable to ordinary mortals. When Christ as God says, before Abraham was, I am, he is merely stating the eternity of the Godhead which must necessarily precede any of the beings created by it. When Christ further tells the disciples that they were with him 83-84 reincarnation, the cycle of necessity before the beginning of the world, all that can be safely inferred is that God, possessing all wisdom, chose his own messengers and fashioned them by his will, and kept them with him until the time of the incarnation. The Gnostics distinguished between Christ and Jesus, a distinction which, if accepted, changes the entire complexion of the subject. If Jesus was a man who was christened or overshadowed by God, then the doctrine of rebirth can apply to that man, as he would be subject to the laws of life. With this interpretation, all Christendom can accept reincarnation and can strive through a succession of lives to achieve Christhood, that is, to be anointed of the Spirit and to walk with God. John the Baptist preceded Jesus, heralding the coming of the new dispensation. According to the Gospels, Jesus was baptized by John at the beginning of the 3 years' ministry. Soon after the baptism, John the Baptist was executed, so the story goes, by Herod the Tetrarch of Galilee. According to Matt 14, 1-2, Herod, learning of the increasing fame of Jesus, said unto his servants, This is John the Baptist, he is risen from the dead. According to Mark 6, 15-16, there were others who said that Jesus was Elias reborn, or one of the prophets, but Herod insisted that it was John, whom he had beheaded, who had risen from the dead. In Matt 16:14, the disciples ask Jesus who he is, and he replies by asking them who they think he is, and they said, Some say that thou art John the Baptist, some Elias, and others, Jeremias, or one of the prophets. All of this is most confusing. In the first place, Herod was not Tetrarch of Galilee at the time he is supposed to have beheaded John. History assures us that Herod, Sir Reincarnation and the New Testament 85 named the Great, died in the year 4 BC. The next embarrassment arises from the fact that John the Baptist and Jesus were contemporaries, Jesus being 30 years of age when he received the baptism. How then could John have been reborn as Jesus, when Jesus was past 30 when John died? It is not likely that John could have risen physically from the grave after his decapitation. If such a circumstance occurred, it scarcely could have escaped mention. There is only one possible answer, namely, that John might have overshadowed or obsessed the body of Jesus. It is unlikely in the extreme that the Jews held this opinion. As these verses can in no way support the doctrine of reincarnation, they require no further consideration. It was the belief of the Jews that Elias the prophet was to come. The opinions of Jesus on this matter are given in Matt 17, 11-13, and Jesus answered and said unto them, Elias truly shall first come and restore all things. But I say unto you, that Elias is come already, and they knew him not, but have done unto him whatsoever they listed. Likewise also shall the Son of Man suffer of them. Then the disciples understood that he spoke to them of John the Baptist. As we already have mentioned, the return of a prophet upon a divine mission is not to be interpreted as reincarnation, but as divine intercession. This verse, therefore, is not admissible as evidence, but, with many others, points toward some teaching of return. There is a tradition that Jesus was the reincarnation of King Solomon, but this belongs to the sphere of Kabbalistic speculation. Among the miracles of Jesus is one which has been advanced as evidence of rebirth. The account is given in John 86 Reincarnation, the Psyche of Necessity 1x1-2, and as Jesus passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man, or his parents, that he was born blind? It appears from this question that the disciples believed it possible for a man to have sinned before his birth. If so, where, and how? It is quite possible that a previous physical existence is implied. The significance of the statement is greatly reduced by the failure of Jesus to confirm the belief of his disciples. But, here again, the words are ambiguous. Jesus replies, Neither hath this man sinned, nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. If we accept the law of retribution as the work of the Lord, then we can understand that the living man had not sinned nor had his parents sinned, but rather that the debt was karmic, that is, had been brought forward from the deeds of the previous personality now dead. This is only an interpretation, however, and is not necessarily intended in the text. There is, however, one statement from the Book of Revelation which appears to be the only positive statement of reincarnation in the two testaments. Re. Iji 12 reads, Him that overcometh will I make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go no more out. The meaning is inaudible. Those who fail must go out again, that is, must return to the corporeal state. Those who achieve, become godlike, return to the Father's house where they become pillars, uprights, and supporters, the living columns in the everlasting house. These are the adepts, the initiates of great mysteries, those whose lives and works have justified them. This is the precise teaching of Buddhism. There can be no doubt that the Jewish mystical sects had contacted Asia reincarnation and the New Testament 87 the Buddhist belief that the sattva or self returns to earth age after age until it achieves liberation is so pointedly stated that we can well understand why Martin Luther believed the Apocalypse to be uninspired. He felt the work to be pagan, and pagan it is. Its inclusion in the New Testament is a proof of the survival of the great philosophical institutions of paganism in the very book of the Christian Church that had dedicated itself to the destruction of paganism with fire and sword. Jesus is believed to have been educated by the Essenes. The ruins of a monastery of this order still stand at Engedi near the Dead Sea. They also had a retreat on the shore of Lake Maurice in Egypt. The entire sect believed in reincarnation and studied the arcane traditions of the Egyptians. Josephus mentions the integrity of the Essenes with the highest praise, stating that they never engaged in any trade of buying or selling but selected occupations which brought them into slight contact with the commerce of their time. They were shepherds, but they kept their flocks only for wool. They were carpenters, and also acted as tutors and instructors. They were learned and pious people in a day of ignorance and false beliefs, and were devoted wholly to the service of the invisible Father whose will and teaching were their law of life. It was these men who wore their hair long, after the order of the Nazirs, and also affected a single white garment woven circularly without a seam, and over this a scarlet cloak. If Jesus had been brought up in this brotherhood, he had been educated to believe that enlightenment was an inner experience and that the promised Messiah would come not in the sky but in the heart of the faithful. 88 Reincarnation, the cycle or necessity. True Christianity as taught by the first Christians prior to the theologizing process was a simple statement of spiritual belief. God, the principle of infinite wisdom, was manifested in the world through certain enlightened prophets who by sanctity of life had come to approach him and know his mysteries. These prophets preached to the Gentiles, the unbelievers, and sought to direct them into lives of sanctity and virtue. Such a teacher was Jesus, whose good name became the foundation of the faith. It is my opinion, based upon an extensive survey of primitive Christian doctrine, that this Jesus, whoever he was and whenever he lived, taught reincarnation as had the initiated priests before him. He taught also the law of compensation and urged men to a higher life upon the authority of the most mystical and profound of Jewish mysticism. Like the Essenes, his immediate teachers, he believed that a good life led to a happy rebirth and ultimate identification with God. Like the Egyptians and Hindus, his more remote mentors, he accepted unto himself a number of followers, and of these he chose 12 to whom he communicate the mysteries. The substance of their knowledge is lost because it was an oral tradition and died with them. The Church symbolizes its peculiar sanctity by means of a gold and silver key with which it would open all locks. Would it be too much to say that these keys are reincarnation and karma, the laws which unlock the mysteries of the universe? It is these two laws, and these laws alone, which can make all things new, and can assure the ultimate salvation of all souls. Early Christian fathers on reincarnation. The first centuries of the Christian Church were devoted largely to the problem of what constituted orthodoxy. Most of the early bishops were pagans by birth and education, and were Christianized only by later conversion. These men brought with them much of their early training and belief, interpreting the new faiths in terms of the old. More than one remained a pagan in his private life, as did Saint Suze, bishop of Ptolemais, who acknowledged that he was a Christian only in his public capacity. When Christian bishops visited Alexandria, it was customary for them to hold two services, one in their own church and the other at the shrine of Serapis. It was not until considerably later that Christians made the momentous discovery that theirs was the only true religion. Most of the educated pagans who were drawn to the church during the first 4 centuries of the Christian era believed in some form of metempsychosis and were convinced that they had lived on this earth before. It is small wonder then that the doctrine of rebirth took on Christian manners and enjoyed a general approval. It was only after the Church had ascended to the first place among the religions of Europe that the reincarnationists were weeded out and branded as heretics. It dawned upon AD 990 reincarnation, the cycle or necessity, the elders, that the teaching of reincarnation was diametrically opposed to such Christian institutions as vicarious atonement, forgiveness of sin, heaven and hell, and baptism. I.e., man could work out his salvation without benefit of clergy. The Church would be relegated to limbo. The doctrines of Origen were hotly disputed, and gradually the concept of metempsychosis was forgotten. During more than 1,000 years the facts of rebirth were ignored while many theological fictions were preached. But truth is immutable and undying, and the doctrine of rebirth has survived. Today the laity, freed from the domination of the clergy, is searching for the rationale of belief. The reasonableness of the doctrine of rebirth is becoming more widely accepted, and ultimately the recognition of the Spirit's repeated embodiments will become the foundation of all intelligent spiritual effort. There is no mightier name in the history of the early Church than that of Saint Augustine. In early life he belonged to the cult of the heresy Archimenes, where he was instructed in the doctrine of the plurality of lives. Later he was converted to Christianity, became Bishop of Hippo, and after death was canonized, becoming a prince of the Church triumphant. In his Confessions 1:6, Saint Augustine asks, "Did I not live in another body, or somewhere else, before entering my mother's womb?" Saint Jerome assisted in the preparation of the Vulgate and was a man of most sanctified and scholarly life. This worthy churchman declared that the doctrine of transmigration was taught as an esoteric mystery in the early Church, being early Christian fathers on reincarnation 9 communicated only to a few specially selected members of the congregation. According to Rufinus, a letter existed written by Saint Anastasius in which he definitely states his belief in pre-existence, and intimates an acceptance of reincarnation. Nemesius, Bishop of Emesa, states in no uncertain terms that the Greek Christians of his time accepted metempsychosis. Arnobius, a Numidian apologist of Christianity, wrote, "We die many times, and often do we rise from the dead." Plus the same Arnobius has left a record that Clement of Alexandria had written a most important account of metempsychosis. Clement of Alexandria declared that reincarnation was a truth transmitted by tradition and authorized by St. Paul himself. Saint Justin the Martyr explicitly states that the soul of man occupies a human body on more than one occasion. He acknowledged the difficulty that men could not remember their previous lives, but went so far as to hazard the opinion that the worst sinners might, after death, have their souls mysteriously attached to the bodies of wild animals. Saint Gregory of Nyssa also expressed himself on the matter of reincarnation. It is absolutely necessary that the soul should be healed and purified, and if this does not take place during its life on earth, it must be accomplished in future lives. This might hint of life in some other state, but considering the opinions of his time, more likely implies metempsychosis. Hieronym, Epistola ad Demeter. Plus adversus gentes. Reincarnation, the cycle or necessity in a prayer which has survived. Saint Sus says, Father, grant that my soul may merge into the light, and be no more thrust back into the illusion of earth. In a thesis on dreams quoted by Thomas Taylor, Saint Sus adds, it is possible by labor and time, and a transition into other lives, for the imaginative soul, to emerge from this dark abode. In Contra Celsum, the great Christian father Origen writes, is it not more in conformity with reason that every soul for certain mysterious reasons, I speak now according to the opinion of Pythagoras and Plato and Empedocles, whom Celsus frequently names, is introduced into a body, and introduced according to its deserts and former actions. In The Will of Life, the Reverend A. Henderson, vicar of St. John de Sepulchre, writes of reincarnation in the early initiation into the mysteries. This memory is preserved in church, a further objection which exists in the minds of many ones based on the supposed condemnation of the doctrine by the Church in the Fifth General Council of Constantinople. A careful consideration of the historical situation makes it abundantly clear that the question of reincarnation was not even raised at the council, and that the condemnation of certain extreme tenets of the Origenists was an act of Menes, Patriarch of Constantinople, in the provincial synod. In this he was instigated by the Emperor Justinian, who ordered him to procure the subscription of the bishops to the anathema. This local synod was held in 543 AD, while the General Council did not meet until 10 years later. It is easy to understand, however, how this extra-councillor sentence of Menes was, at a later period, mistaken for a decree of the General Council. Justinian had closed the classical academies in Athens and Rome, and had sent the philosophers into exile. Godet Erdicaristian Fathers on Reincarnation 93 on by enemies of the Origenist teachings. Justinian condemned Origen by an imperial edict which later was confirmed by Pope Vigilius. Ludislawski writes, this condemnation refers only to a very peculiar form of the doctrine of pre-existence, implying the fall of perfect spirits who had already reached heaven. Such a radical extension of palingenesis deserves condemnation, but leaves untouched the real old tradition, according to which reincarnation corresponded to the Chrysidian conception of purgatory. It appears on the basis of expert testimony that the actual doctrine of reincarnation as the proper means of ultimately accomplishing unity with God has never been anathematized or declared heretical by the Christian Church. It is astonishing, therefore, that the doctrine so necessary to the understanding of life should be ignored by even the liberal denominations. The doctrine of reincarnation is the most important and significant teaching which the churches of Christendom could disseminate today. The mysterious apocryphal book called the Perstis Sophia, a writing rich with the tradition of the Gnosis and claiming to set forth the esoteric teachings of Jesus as communicated to Mary of Magdala, supports the belief in reincarnation with the following statement, but if he shall have sinned once, twice, or thrice, they shall reject that soul, sending it back again into the world according to the form of the sin that it may have committed. After the Synod of Constantinople, the doctrine of reincarnation departed from Europe, and its absence contributed *C pre-existence and reincarnation by W. Ludislawski. 94 Reincarnation, the cycle or necessity, much to the misery and desolation of the Dark Ages. Like many other philosophical traditions, it was carried away to the deserts of Arabia, where it flourished with the rising power of the Saracens, to return to Europe with the home-coming Crusaders. Reincarnation has always been a philosophical doctrine, and as philosophy languished in the West, the doctrine of metempsychosis languished with it. There were occasional exceptions, however. It may interest you to know that some of the advocates of reincarnation in the Roman Catholic Church during the Middle Ages were Saint Francis of Assisi, 1182–1226, who founded the Franciscan order, the learned Irish monk Johannes Scotus Erigena, Saint Bonaventura, 1221–1274, Cardinal and General of the Franciscan order, the Seraphic Doctor, Thomas Campanella, the Dominican monk who was sent into exile on account of his belief in the successive return of the soul to earth. M.D. Orient, an Orthodox Catholic, writes, "Destiny's aim in this doctrine, so evidently based on reason, everything is linked and held together, for all that was needed in order to bring to pass these various results, was for God to call back into existence certain souls he knew to be naturally suited for his purpose. Consequently, the most sublime mysteries of religion, the most wonderful facts regarding the destiny of the soul find their natural explanation in a clear understanding of metempsychosis." Among the heretical sects of Christendom which believed in the doctrine of reincarnation were the Manichaeans, Priscillianists, and the Albigenses. The Manichaeans combined Gnosticism, Persian dualism, and Christian monotheism. Reincarnation was a prominent tenet of the sect. Azoth, February 1920, Letters that may help you. Number 5. Christian Fathers on Reincarnation. 95. Manichaeanism exercised a profound influence throughout the Near East until it was dissolved by the pressure of Christian orthodoxy. The Priscillianists were followers of Priscillian, a Spanish bishop of the 4th century. The members of the group combined Gnostic and Manichaean philosophy with their orthodox beliefs, with the result that Priscillian was condemned for heresy by the Roman Emperor Maximus and executed in 385 AD. Remnants of the sect remained, however, until the 6th century. The Priscillianists accepted pre-existence and speculated on the subject of metempsychosis. For these and similar beliefs they were destroyed. The Albigenses, who flourished in the 12th and 13th centuries, brought down upon themselves not only the wrath of the Church but the strong hand of the Inquisition. Among the beliefs for which they were tortured and killed was the doctrine of rebirth. Heretical sects sprang up as long as the temporal power of the Christian Church remained undisputed. Various councils and synods dealt severely with these schisms but could not prevent the spread of unorthodox mysticism. Unfortunately, the Protestant Reformation did not result in Christian liberalism. The Reformers were puritanical themselves and achieved a measure of orthodoxy equal to if not greater than that of the Church they condemned. It may be interesting to note a curious tendency in the early Church to regard certain Greek philosophers as Christian although they had died before the birth of Christ. Plato, Socrates, and Pythagoras enjoyed considerable dignity in the early Church. A tradition was circulated that Pythagoras was a monk. Even skeptical old Socrates was embellished. 96. Reincarnation, the cycle of necessity with holy orders. And a rumor persists that Gautama Buddha was canonized under the name of Saint Jehoshaphat. These circumstances may have inspired Voltaire when he declared that Plato should be regarded as the first canonized saint in the Christian Church. There is reason also to suspect that the pagan mathematician, Hypatia, the greatest of women philosophers and the teacher of sciences, was canonized under the name of Saint Catherine of Alexandria. The early fathers knew that the Christian faith was deeply rooted in pagan doctrine and tradition. Christendom is very similar to classic paganism, with the difference that the doctrine of original sin has been substituted in the place of reincarnation and karma. Rebirth. In modern Christendom, the night train to Jerusalem was an achievement in discomfort. I shared the compartment with an elderly clergyman on sabbatical leave. He was beginning to be a little disappointed. Instead of a land flowing with milk and honey, he saw only a desolate rocky country through the gloom of a winter storm. In the course of a long evening our conversation drifted toward philosophy, and before we realized it we were analyzing the theory of reincarnation. The minister personally was not antagonistic to the doctrine. He was a human being beset with those problems and uncertainties which afflict men. The old man acknowledged that the dogma of his faith did not entirely satisfy him. He sensed the need of a philosophy, some fuller realization to give reason and strength to belief. During the conversation he admitted that had he been God he would not have created a world filled with sin, misery, and death. He would not have made some men great, others lowly, some wise, others foolish, some good, and others bad. Nor would he have destroyed men for their sins or their unbelief. The clergyman's face lit up. Had he been God he would have created all men happy. He would have loved them all regardless of their shortcomings. He would have forgiven 97-98 reincarnation, the cycle or necessity them all in spite of their mistakes. A loving father might chastise his children, but he would have devised a plan that would ultimately bring all of them to salvation and peace. But alas, he was only a man with the heart of a man and the ignorance of a man. He shook his head slowly. God knew best and the church could not be wrong. So with a smile that had much of resignation in it he concluded his remarks somewhat as follows: "You know, personally, I would like to believe in reincarnation. It seems so reasonable, so just, so harmonious with nature. But unfortunately, I am not free to believe. My religion teaches me to believe what I am told. It is not for me to question. I must follow in humility and obedience the laws and doctrines of my faith. Most graduates of theological seminaries have read about metempsychosis, but they have regarded the teaching as a rejected relic of old pagan theology. It never dawns on most of these young men that reincarnation is a living truth, vital to enlightened thinking. It has been my observation that the average clergyman is far more orthodox than his denomination requires. The local clergyman frequently regards as heretical the doctrines which his own superiors admit or even admire. What is the real attitude of the modern church toward reincarnation? Is it really a monstrous and misshapen heresy? Speaking for Protestant Christianity, Dean Inga, late of St. Paul's, finds no conflict between this, the oldest creed, and modern Episcopalianism. It is obvious therefore that the Protestant Christians can accept the doctrine of rebirth without endangering their immortal souls. Reim THTN Mopern Christendom 99. For the Catholic Church there could be no more powerful voice than that of the late Cardinal Mercier, the heroic prelate of the Belgians. While the Cardinal did not commit himself as to a personal belief in reincarnation, he definitely stated that the doctrine did not in any way conflict with Catholic dogma. For those who are interested in the relation of the Church to the dogma of palingenesis, an Italian book, published in 1911, is of the greatest importance. Attilio Brcrye Alessandro Favero, Monsignor Arcivescovo El Pucer Passaval, Milano, Fratelli Bacca, 1911. Here we find the life and letters of a pious and learned Roman Catholic archbishop who at the age of 64 accepted the truth of pre-existence and reincarnation from two disciples of the Polish seer Toiansk I, namely Stanislaw Farksausekra and Tancredi Canonico. Archbishop Passavitr, 1820-97, admitted that reincarnation is not condemned by the Church, and that it is not at all in conflict with any Catholic dogma. His letters prove that a very learned Catholic scholar can believe in reincarnation without leaving his church. He lived up to the age of 77, unshaken in his conviction that he had already lived many times on earth and that he was likely to return. Another Catholic priest, who also after long discussion gave up the prejudice against reincarnation which prevails among the Catholic clergy, was Edward Dunswan, whose letters, edited by Attilio Becchi and Joseph Comena, were published by Bona in Torino in 1915. Many other priests in Poland and Italy believe in reincarnation, being influenced by the great mystic André Toianski, 1799-1878, whose works were printed privately. 100 Reincarnation, the cycle of necessity in 3 large volumes at Torino in 1882, and are circulated among the disciples of the Master. Asterisk on the Sunday of August 18, 1893, Archdeacon Colley, formerly curator of St. Mary's, Portsmouth, preached a sermon on reincarnation from the pulpit of Christ's Church, Leamington, England. It is a far cry from Cali's enlightened viewpoint back to the attitude of the Inquisitional court that condemned Giordano Bruno to the flames in 1592. The principal charge against Bruno was his belief in a kind of metempsychosis. In The Heroic Enthusiast, a work translated into English by L. Williams, Bruno's philosophy is summed up thus: nothing in the universe is lost, everything changes and is transformed, the soul transmigrates, and drawing round itself atom to atom, it reconstructs for itself a new body. A curious incident in modern Christian theology is the case of the Reverend William Alger, a Unitarian divine who published in 1860 a book entitled For Critical History of the Doctrine of a Future Life. The Reverend Alger had no place in his heart for metempsychosis in 1860. But when he republished the work in 1878 he had greatly matured in viewpoint, and admitted that he had been converted to the doctrine of rebirth. A paragraph from his book typifies the revision of his ideas. In every event, it must be confessed that of all the thoughtful and refined forms of the belief in a future life none has had so extensive and prolonged a prevalence as this. It has the vote of the majority, having for ages on ages * pre-existence and reincarnation by W. Lutoslawski. London, 1928. Plus see Luchtfer, Volume 2 p. 112. Research in Modern Christendom 101 been held by half the human race with an intensity of conviction almost without a parallel. Indeed, the most striking fact about the doctrine of the repeated incarnations of the soul, its form and experience in each successive embodiment being determined by its merits and demerits in the preceding ones, is the constant reappearance of that faith in all parts of the world, and its permanent hold on certain great nations. Today reincarnation is a thoroughly established belief in the Western world. True, it is frowned upon by some orthodox movements, but among thinking people there have been a great number of converts. Thomas Edison was for some years a member of the Theosophical Society, and Henry Ford, America's foremost industrialist, has publicly stated his acceptance of the belief in reincarnation based upon a wide experience in contacting and working with men in every walk of life. I have learned that a number of liberal ministers are enrolled in mystical Christian organizations that teach reincarnation. These men have not yet reached the point where they are willing officially to teach the subject, but it influences their viewpoint and adds a quality of honesty and sincerity to their sermons. In the last 50 years numerous organizations have grown up in Europe and America whose teachings emphasize rebirth. The Theosophical Society converted thousands to the doctrine, and other groups such as the Unity Movement, the Anthroposophical Society, and the Rosicrucian Fellowship, have done important work in popularizing the teaching of metempsychosis. Missionary activity also has been a factor. A number of sincere men and women have gone to distant parts of 102 reincarnation, the cycle of Neccessity the earth to bring the blessings of Christianity to so-called backward and primitive races. Wherever they went, whether it were to the heart of darkest Africa or the desolate plains of Mongolia, these missionaries contacted the doctrine of rebirth. In some cases it was the missionary who was converted, and returning became a teacher to his own people. An example of this is Dr. Dwight Goddard, recently deceased, who served for some years as a Christian missionary to China. Perceiving the depth and splendor of Eastern philosophy, he became a Buddhist and devoted the balance of his life to disseminating Buddhism, of which reincarnation and karma are the very essence, among the peoples of the Western world. The doctrine of reincarnation is constantly increasing in popularity as more and more Western people are embracing the teaching. Therefore we may look forward to a world made better through the increasing integrity of enlightened individuals. Modern believers in reincarnation, it is a habit of most men to agree with the great, the learned, or the powerful. According to Francis Bacon, we learn not only from experiment and observation but from the testimony of those who have preceded us in time. It is important to many people to know that reincarnation was taught not only in the ancient world but also in recent times. The doctrine of rebirth has survived the constant change of empire and is part of the philosophy of our modern world. Great men have believed in it, wise men have sought to probe its mysteries, and brave men have dared to live by its laws. George Footmore, American clergyman, Bible scholar, and Orientalist, in his work Metempsychosis writes, a theory which has been embraced by so large a part of mankind, of many races and religions, and has commended itself to some of the most profound thinkers of all time, cannot be lightly dismissed. Sensing the insufficiency of the orthodoxy he had left behind, the great Jewish philosopher Baruch Spinoza speculated on the eternity of man and the permanence of the mind in space. It is impossible for us to remember that we had existence prior to the body, since the body can have no vestige of it, and eternity cannot be defined in terms of time or have any relation of time. But, nevertheless, we have in our 103-104 reincarnation, the psyche of necessity experience a perception that we are eternal. For the mind is sensible no less of what it understands than of what it remembers. Although, therefore, we do not remember that we exist before the body, yet we perceive that our mind is eternal, in so far as it involves the body's essence under the category of eternity, and that this its existence cannot be defined by time or interpreted by duration. From this quotation it appears that Spinoza was groping toward the doctrine of metempsychosis. In his monadology the great German philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm von Leibniz likewise indicates a tendency toward the acceptance of metempsychosis. He was an initiate of European mystical societies, suspected of being a Rosicrucian, and a profound student of Pythagorean and Platonic mathematics. His personal belief in reincarnation is quite possible. François-Marie Voltaire, the satirical French philosopher and author, summed up the matter of reincarnation with one pithy remark: it is not more surprising to be born twice than once, everything in nature is resurrection. Benjamin Franklin, who as a poor boy entered Philadelphia with a bun under each arm, was America's first philosopher, and according to the opinions of some, America's first gentleman. This almanac maker and ambassador writes, thus, finding myself to exist in the world, I believe I shall, in some shape or other, always exist, and with all the inconveniences human life is liable to, I shall not object to A*E6, Book V. Mopern Believers in Reincarnation 105 new edition of mine, hoping, however, that the errata of the last may be corrected. David Hume, Scottish historian and philosopher, commit himself definitely to a belief in reincarnation. The soul, if immortal, existed before our birth. What is incorruptible must be ungenerable. Metempsychosis is the only system of immortality that philosophy can hearken to. The philosophers Lessing, Schlegel, Fichte, and Herder are usually included in lists of believers in reincarnation. Schlegel describes nature as a ladder of resurrection. Fichte discusses his theories in Destiny of Man. And Herder wrote dialogues on transmigration. In most cases, however, the quotations are ambiguous. This may have been a protective mechanism against the orthodoxy of their time, or it may have resulted from certain mental reservations. There is considerable evidence that the great poet and mystic Wolfgang von Goethe accepted reincarnation. The words in Faust represent years of study and indicate the trend of Goethe's mind. The soul of man is like water, from heaven it cometh, to heaven it mounteth, and thus again it must return to earth, forever changing. This belief is confirmed in a fragment written by Goethe in 1776 and directed to the object of his deep personal attachment. Frau von Stein, tell me, what has fate in store for 106 reincarnation, the cycle or necessity us, and why bound she us so close together? Ah! Thou were in time long gone my sister or my wife. Isaac D'Israeli, father of the immortal Dizzy, afterward Lord Beaconsfield, held opinions which unquestionably affected his son's life, and through his son the British Empire. Isaac D'Israeli wrote, if we accept the belief of a future remuneration beyond this life for suffering virtue and retribution for successful crime, there is no system so simple and so little repugnant to our understanding, as that of metempsychosis. The pains and pleasures of this life are by the system considered as the recompense or the punishment of our actions in another state. In his article, Proofs of Reincarnation, A. J. Anderson records a curious fact concerning Napoleon I. Napoleon was an instance. Here was a man, born in the humblest possible condition of life, rising until he dominated empires and sent kings from their thrones at a single word, rising from obscurity to the very pinnacle of human power, a man who, in those strange, abnormal conditions into which he sometimes passed, would cry out to his marshals, "I am Charlemagne. Do you know who I am? I am Charlemagne." In his essay on religion, Arthur Schopenhauer commits himself to a belief in reincarnation. Thus, the absurdity and offensiveness of this doctrine, referring to Christendom, lie only in the Old Testament's presupposition that man is the product of an unknown will which has created him out of nothing. If, on the contrary, always admitting that moral qualities are inborn in man, we look at this fact by the light of the Brahmanical and Buddhistic belief in metempsychosis, the whole thing takes on quite a different appearance. For, according to metempsychosis, those inborn moral qualities modern believers in reincarnation 107 which we find in one man and not in another, are not a gift of grace from some unknown deity, but the fruit of man's own actions in another life in some other world. The New England Brahmin, Ralph Waldo Emerson, has long been regarded as America's greatest philosopher. His acceptance of reincarnation is proved by his own words: "We must infer our destiny from the apparent. We are driven by instinct but have innumerable experiences which are of no visible value, and we may resolve through many lives before we shall assimilate or exhaust them." The beloved poet Walt Whitman also acknowledged metempsychosis, and as you, life, I reckon you are the leavings of many deaths. No doubt I have died myself 10,000 times before. Professor Thomas H. Huxley, one of the world's greatest biologists and the moving spirit of 19th-century science, accepted the reasonableness of reincarnation, like the doctrine of evolution itself, that of transmigration has its roots in the world of reality, and it may claim such support as the great argument from analogy is capable of supplying. *V. B. Tyler, acknowledged as the father of modern anthropology, admits his acceptance of the teaching of rebirth with the following statement: "So it may seem that the original idea of transmigration was the straightforward and reasonable one of human souls being reborn in new human bodies." Friedrich Nietzsche, who patterned so much of his philosophy after that of Schopenhauer, seems to have accepted *C evolution and ethics. 108 Reincarnation, the cycle or necessity. The doctrine of reincarnation: "My doctrine is, live so that thou mayst desire to live again, that is thy duty, for, in any case, thou wilt live again." In his autobiography The Days of My Life, chapter on religion, Sir H. Rider Haggard, world-famous novelist, writes, "Final judgment I can understand after many lives of growing towards the good or towards the ill, and, indeed, the faith I follow declares it." Haggard raises his voice against the, to him, revolting belief that our eternal future depends upon the actions performed in any one life. Two of the great persons of our day who believe in the doctrine of reincarnation are Rabindranath Tagore and Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi is the greatest man who has lived on this earth in the last 500 years. His name will be remembered as long as history is recorded. A man of peace in a world of war, a man of integrity in a world dedicated to personal advantage, this little Hindu leader is living the law. By religion a member of the Jain sect, the Mahatma's life is firmly established on the great laws of reincarnation and karma. The cycle of necessity. A summary of modern belief: the human life wave is made up of 60 billion spirits or entities. Of this number, about 2 billion incarnate at one time, making up the population of the earth. The spirit, ego, or self of the human being has been evolving through various forms and conditions for nearly 1,000 million years. This vast period of time was used in the perfecting of the physical body as a medium for the expression of the entity in the physical world. The human body as we know it was first distinguishable some 50 million years ago. At that time the entity controlled the body by a rudimentary nervous system which it since has refined to its present degree of subtlety. About 25 million years ago the division of the sexes made sight and thought possible in the body. From that period to the present time the entity has been constantly refining the body which serves as the vehicle of its physical expression. Present humanity bears witness to hundreds of millions of years of growth which we see recapitulated in the embryo and fetus. Millions of years of evolution lie ahead. Man is becoming human slowly but inevitably, because the subjective entity is constantly demanding better and more responsive organisms. The entire process through which the human being is passing in the mystery of growth may appropriately be 110 reincarnation, the cycle of necessity termed the cycle of necessity. All growth is motivated by karma, that is, action and reaction. It is karma which makes reincarnation necessary in order that compensation may justly be administered. Man is eternally suffering, and misfortune is a constant goad impelling him forward toward a more perfect state. Karma is the law, and reincarnation is the means by which that law is administered. It is difficult for the average person to realize the full significance of an existence that is lived on planes other than that which may be described in physical terms and that extends from the beginning to the end of time. But regardless of his actions, regardless of his virtues or vices, regardless even of his efforts to destroy himself, man is an immortal, eternal being manifesting through an infinite sequence of bodies, each a little nobler than the one before. We are here today doing the things we are doing today because of the sequence of lives. The things that we are doing today will become the elements of later existences, bodies without end. Yet there is no fatalism in this doctrine. Each state and condition that comes to it is the result of personal action. We make and unmake ourselves. There is no strange and distant God smiling upon some and frowning upon others. We are not the blind instruments of some fatal necessity. We are not marked by Adam's sin. Each of us bears witness to his own character, to the thoughts and actions of lives long past. Each of us is the architect of his own tomorrow. The future is in our own hands. It requires a little courage to acknowledge personal responsibility, to accept a belief that teaches that there is no escape from action or the consequences of action. It takes a high measure of resolve to be willing to face the world and acknowledge that all the misfortunes which occur are Tuesday psyche or necessity the results of our own mistakes. That is why the laws of reincarnation and karma have always belonged to the wise and strong, and by their very nature are not suitable to lesser intellects. In the words of a modern psychologist, it is inconceivable to the subconscious self that there ever was a time that it did not exist. Though each person lives for today, he cannot comprehend the condition of not existing. Man, though living and dying, takes eternal existence for granted. All of the higher purposes of the man, his dreams of accomplishment, his noblest aspirations, and his most powerful ambitions, demand eternity for their fulfillment. As we look about us upon that strange aggregation of creatures that makes up society, we realize that no doctrine based upon the theory of a single life can solve the problems of this multitude. For the majority, there is little vision, the future stretches out into a mysterious and unknown expanse. Yet each of us in his innermost heart of hearts is aware of some great force that moves him relentlessly through the years toward the unknown. Man is a creature of many sorrows, suffering is the common lot. Each in his own life knows the varied ills which arise in the chemistry of human relationships. Only the wise man can be happy, for the rest there are years of uncertainty. Why should a benign and all-knowing providence afflict many and bless a few? Why should some come into this world diseased and crippled, others be born to every advantage? Why are some wise in childhood and others foolish in age? Who loose sin and death upon the world that all the dreams we live by should come in the end to a common ruin. 112 Reincarnation, the cycle or an accessory. The Church says that it is the will of God. Science says that it is the law of nature. But philosophy maintains that all of these strange conditions are the growing pains of an immortal soul. Reincarnation and karma are the only explanations for the mystery of life that the reason can embrace. These laws give purpose to action, meaning to existence. These same laws release man from the monotony of the daily routine by giving him perspective and the power to see beyond the horizon of his present life. When Gautama Buddha brought the doctrine of rebirth to India, it released millions of human beings from the hopelessness of a caste system which gave opportunity to the highly born alone. When Pythagoras brought the same philosophy to Greece, it freed slaves long bound to the traditions of the Attic state. Pythagoras freed his own slaves, and one of them succeeded him as head of his academy. Reincarnation comes to our modern world as liberation from the caste system of special privilege. It destroys our illusional concept of wealth and poverty. It breaks down the barriers that exist between employer and employee. It gives us a vision beyond wealth, a vision towards some utopia to come in which men will dwell together in a camaraderie of purpose. Those who know men best realize that when humanity in general recognizes the law of reincarnation, which is the only teaching that will explain the true meaning of things as they are, men will immediately become more zealous in quickly putting the world in order. In the words of Henry Ford, I adopted the theory of reincarnation when I was 26. Religion offered nothing to the point, at least, I was unable to discover it. Tuesday Sisi or any Cesare 113 Iron work could not give me complete satisfaction. Work is futile if we cannot utilize the experience we collect in one life in the next. When I discovered reincarnation, it was as if I had discovered a universal plan. I realized that there was a chance to work out my ideas. Time was no longer limited. I was no longer a slave to the hands of the clock. There was time enough to plan and create. The discovery of reincarnation put my mind at ease. I was settled. I felt that order and progress were present in the mystery of life. I no longer looked elsewhere for the solution to the riddle of life. If you preserve a record of this conversation, write it so that it puts men's minds at ease. I would like to communicate to others the calmness that the long view of life gives to us. We all retain, however faintly, memories of past lives. We frequently feel that we have witnessed a scene or lived through a moment in some previous existence. But that is not essential, it is the essence, the gist, the result of experience, that are valuable and remain with us. Reincarnation and karma also light the dark mystery of ethics and morality. These laws give reason to right action, revealing that every action is intimately related to the progress of the individual. We no longer do right because of scriptural admonition, but because we have learned the meaning of right and wrong as they react upon us through the law of karma. We grow through every thought and action. Registered quoted from the esoteric tradition, IL 641, by G. de Puricker. 114 Reincarnation, the psyche of necessity we learn not for one life, but for eternity. Each art and science that we master becomes part of the immortal self flowing through the ages. It is no longer difficult to understand how genius flows from the fountains of the past, how each of us brings into this life the essence of all that has gone before. One child may play the violin at 6, another may lead symphony orchestras at 9, a third, a little boy in Burma, may teach the most profound of Buddhist doctrines at the age of sight. Reincarnation and karma alone explain these phenomena, and explain also all the hidden powers and impulses, characteristics and traits, which come with us into birth. Plato believed and taught that all learning was remembering, and the very word education originally meant to draw forth that which already was known. We all come into the world with abilities, talents, and peculiar aptitudes. We are destined to certain labors by the karma which we have brought with us out of the lives gone before. How noble then are the doctrines of reincarnation and karma! How filled with learning is this mysterious cycle of necessity! We come into this world not to be happy, primarily, but to learn. Life after life we pass through complicated experiences until in the fullness of living we learn to grow happily. Happiness is the byproduct of our harmonious adjustment to the universal plan. Where do we exist between lives? What is the subjective state? Is the entity in heaven or in hell? The philosopher replies that whether living or dead, man is always himself. For a time he manifests subjectively, taking into himself the experiences of the outer world, and then Tuesday Circe or Necessity 115 for another space of time he is subjective, assimilating into soul power the experiences of his physical existence. According to the doctrine of rebirth we may add nothing new to ourselves in the intervals between lives. During this time we examine, order, and classify the experiences we have gained. We make them part of an immortal self that, enriched with experiences, proceeds into another body. There are some who, hypnotized by physical existence, struggle to hold the possessions of their physical lives. Having achieved wealth, honor, and power, they forget that these temporal glories have small place in the universal plan. It is the purpose of the universe that all men should inevitably outgrow physical things. Man should realize that the inner life alone is real and permanent, and all else belongs to the sphere of illusion. One of the duties of rebirth is to sever man's will from the objects of his physical attention. As we come of age, we leave the world behind, finding nothing in the material state to be of value except the experience of self-mastery. The cycle of necessity is the endless cycle of rebirths, to be born, to die, and to be born again, century after century, age after age, until the very end of time mingles with eternity. The cycle of necessity is symbolized in the East by a spinning wheel to which human beings cling tenaciously, the ignorant clinging to the smaller life they know while the enlightened pass on to a larger life they have come to understand. The cycle of necessity is the symbolical name which represents the great time and effort, the period of striving after truth through which each entity must pass. The laws of reincarnation and karma make possible the constant progress of all living things. Not only does man grow, but the sticks, 116 reincarnation, the Sisi or necessity stones, and stars grow with him. All are unfolding together, all life is growing up in space and toward space. The cycle of necessity ends at some distant, incalculable time, and life having fulfilled the pilgrimage of uncertainty comes at last to the end. This end the Buddhists call nirvana, and the Christians heaven. But names mean nothing. All such terms merely represent rest after labor, peace at the end of seeking. Reincarnation in the animal world. The Neoplatonist Porphyry, in his 4 books on abstinence from animal food, credits the animal creation with the possession of a spirit and soul. The Buddhists who institute the first hospitals for the care of animals taught that they were man's younger brothers who should not be misused but treated with every consideration. The teachings of the Neoplatonists and Buddhists concerning the rights of animals are in substance as follows: all the animate and inanimate bodies in nature are ensouled by the same divine force. This spiritual power manifests through the various kingdoms according to the intrinsic nature and the degree of evolution which each has attained. The difference between man and the animal is intellectual rather than spiritual or physical. The lower beasts lacking certain mental and sensory developments peculiar to man are incapable of reflection and expression to the same degree. Science has discovered that certain of the higher brutes, especially the dog, the elephant, and the ape, have attained considerable mental development. The elephant's memory is prodigious, the dog's loyalty is traditional, and the ape's ingenuity enables it to solve problems which baffle 12-year-old children. It is obvious from the study of highly 118 reincarnation, the Sisi or Anacursory domesticated animals, that these creatures have absorbed a great deal from their human associates and are capable of a measure of true intellection. For thousands of years man has thoughtlessly and cruelly exploited the lower members of the animal kingdom. It is only within recent years that average people have seriously taken up the fight in defense of the animal's right to exist. Philosophically, the difference between man and the animal lies in the metaphysical structure. The human being has individualized its sattva or ego. As a result, man is responsible only to himself for his actions. He is rewarded for good and punished for evil by his own spiritual nature. In the case of the animal, the entity has not been individualized but remains as one collective source of life. Man emanates only one physical body at a time, the animal entity emanates numerous physical bodies at one time, all of which are dependent upon itself. There is a collective animal entity for each of the species of animals and their subdivisions. Thus there is a collective entity for dogs, and within this, lesser collective entities for each type or kind of dog. When man incarnates, he is a complete unit consisting of an entity and its mental, emotional, and physical bodies. The separate animal is not complete, for while its lower bodies are individual, its entity and mind are collective. The result is that in the animal evolution all animals develop and gain experience through the evolution of any one of their kind, whereas man must grow individually. When an animal dies, the collective entity immediately sends out other embodiments, but there can be no such thing as the reincarnation of any specific animal. Reincarnation in the animal world 119. As animals have superphysical as well as physical bodies, they may continue for a time in the invisible worlds. Therefore animals, like humans, can be earthbound, and under certain conditions can be seen clairvoyantly after they have physically died. Unlike man, however, their organism cannot be impressed with mental or moral virtues which will affect subsequent bodies. There can be no karma in the animal kingdom. The animal is not a self-responsible creature, and because it has no individual will, it is incapable of sin or error. The cruelty, gentleness, or intelligence of animals is due to their type, their instincts, and the environment in which they are placed, and not to any moral urge. The animal has a form of psychism somewhat similar to that of primitive human races. Before an earthquake in South America, horses broke from their stalls and took refuge on safe ground. There is a well-known tradition that rats will leave an ill-fated ship. Being incapable of moral determination, the animal depends entirely upon impulses pressed upon its brain by the collective entity. Being without willpower, it cannot resist any of these impulses. Therefore all animals of a certain type have approximately identical habits and characteristics. If the animal is not subject to karma, it is necessary to explain in the light of philosophy the numerous misfortunes which occur to animals. The normal consciousness of a higher mammal is equivalent to that of a human being under a light anesthesia or light hypnosis. The nervous impulses of the animal organism pass not to the brain directly, but to the collective entity. Therefore it is the entity and not the animal which feels pain. The collective entity B120 reincarnation, the psyche or any accessory, belongs to a much higher order than the animal, and is subject therefore to rebirth and karma. The pain which an animal apparently suffers is in reality a physical reflex such as frequently is observed under anesthesia. The individual animal is not subject to suffering as we know it, despite appearances to the contrary. This law which protects the animal, although not appearing to do so, does not prevent the human being from creating karma for himself by mistreating animals. The law of reincarnation is not applicable to animals because of their constant emergence from the collective self, but the approximate period between waves of emanation from 5 to 10 years in higher mammals, and only a few days in some insects and fishes. Reincarnation in the plant world. The plant creation is one complete cycle lower than that of the animal, and 2 cycles lower than that of man. Like the animal, the plant is not individualized but is the manifestation of collective entities. The plant is capable of creating form and of growth, but within its own organism is incapable of intrinsic motion, emotion, or thought. The group entity of the plant world is exceedingly complex, and the time element far more complicated than is the case of animals. The oldest living things on earth are members of the plant kingdom. The plant kingdom has a greater tenacity for life than any of the other forms, and of all the kingdoms is the most adaptable to environment. Plant growth is most easily stimulated by artificial means. The lines between types are less formal than in the animal world, as demonstrated by the late Luther Burbank. There is no objective consciousness of environment in most parts of the plant world. There is, however, the trace of a protective instinct, as demonstrated by experiments carried on in the last decade. Like the animal, the plant kingdom is not subject to the laws of reincarnation and karma, but only the law of evolution through the collective entity. The plant has so simple an organism that it has little superphysical existence. The 122 reincarnation, the cycle of any caesary etheric double, disintegrates within 24 hours after the death of the plant. Therefore it cannot be observed clairvoyantly, but simply fades away after the collective entity withdraws its energy. The group consciousness of the plant kingdom is formless though possessing being. When we say formless, we mean that it is azonic, or like the gods of the Greeks is capable of being everywhere at the same time, unlimited by place. The plant collective entity has a mental and emotional nature, and like that of the animal is capable of suffering, karma, and rebirth. For that reason certain forms of plants, like certain types of animals, become